The entire city believed Lucian Moretti was dying. What they didn't know was that someone was murdering him in plain sight. And the only witness was a woman everyone ignored. Chicago's most feared crime lord lay paralyzed in his own penthouse while his enemies prepared to carve up his empire. But when a plus-sized cleaning woman stumbled onto the truth, she became the only person standing between the king of monsters and a silent grave. This is the story of how the invisible became unforgettable. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. And stay until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and revenge. Bamasam. The penthouse smelled like expensive failure. Elena Ward pushed her squeaking cleaning cart through the marble hallway, head down, shoulders hunched in that practiced invisibility she'd perfected over 37 years of being looked through rather than at. The wheels rattled against imported Italian tile, while armed men in $1,000 suits stood outside mahogany doors, their eyes sliding past her like she was part of the furniture. She preferred it that way. Being invisible kept you breathing in places like this. The Moretti estate occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Drake Tower, a monument to blood money and violence, dressed up in crystal chandeliers and original Picassos. Elena had cleaned these halls for 3 years now, arriving at midnight when the dealers and enforcers finally went home, leaving behind their cigarette ash and occasionally their victims. She'd learned not to ask questions about the stains. Tonight felt different, though. Wrong. The kind of wrong that made your skin crawl even when you couldn't explain why. The usual guards weren't at their posts, doors that should have been locked stood slightly ajar, and the penthouse itself, Lucian Moretti's private sanctuary, sat too quiet for a man who supposedly still lived there. Elena paused outside the master suite, her hand gripping the cart handle so tight her knuckles went white. She shouldn't go in. She knew better. 3 years of strict routine had taught her exactly which rooms to enter and which to pretend didn't exist. But the door was open, just a crack, and through that crack came the sound of someone trying very hard not to make any sound at all. Elena's first instinct was to walk away. Her second instinct was to run. But somewhere between those two survival mechanisms, curiosity hooked into her chest and pulled. She stepped inside. The bedroom was enormous, decorated in blacks and deep reds that swallowed the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. A massive bed sat in the center like an altar, and on that bed lay what remained of Lucian Moretti. Elena had seen him before, of course. Everyone in Chicago knew what he looked like. 6'2", dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins, eyes like smoke before a fire. The kind of man who walked into rooms and watched everyone else shrink. But the thing on the bed wasn't that man anymore. Lucien lay motionless beneath black silk sheets, his once powerful frame reduced to sharp angles and wasted muscle. His skin had gone gray. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling with the glazed expression of someone trapped inside their own skull. The rumors were true then. The king was dying. Elena should have left. Should have backed out quietly and pretended she'd never seen the great Lucian Moretti reduced to this. But something stopped her cold. A man in a white coat stood beside the bed, his back to the door. A doctor, Elena assumed. Except doctors didn't usually move like that. All nervous energy and quick glances toward the door like they were doing something they shouldn't. Elena stepped behind the velvet curtains flanking the windows, her heart hammering so loud she was certain he'd hear it. Through the gap in the fabric, she watched the doctor pull a syringe from his medical bag, the liquid inside catching the light like amber. He didn't speak, didn't check vitals or examine his patient, just inserted the needle directly into Lucian's IV line and depressed the plunger with practiced efficiency. Then he packed up his bag and left without a single word. Elena waited in the darkness, barely breathing, while footsteps echoed down the hallway and eventually disappeared. Only when silence wrapped around the room again did she step out from behind the curtains. Her legs shook as she approached the bed. Lucien hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. But his eyes, those smoke-gray eyes that supposedly couldn't focus on anything anymore, tracked her movement across the room with perfect, terrible clarity. He was awake. Completely, fully, horrifyingly awake, and he couldn't move a single muscle. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, choking back the sound trying to escape. She stumbled backward, knocking into the nightstand hard enough to rattle the collection of pill bottles arranged there. Her first instinct screamed at her to run, to get out, to forget everything she'd just seen. But those eyes. They followed her with an intensity that burned straight through the paralysis, and in their depths, Elena saw something she recognized with stomach-turning familiarity. Helplessness. The most powerful crime lord in Chicago was completely, utterly helpless, and someone was killing him. Elena's hands trembled as she picked up one of the discarded medical vials from the trash bin beside the bed. The label was partially torn, but she could make out enough. Sodium thiopental, vecuronium, names that meant nothing to her but felt heavy with intent. She slipped the vial into her cleaning smock and forced herself to look at Lucian one more time. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath gray skin. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cool air, and his eyes, Christ, his eyes were screaming at her even though his mouth couldn't form a single sound. "I saw," Elena whispered, barely audible even to herself. "I saw what he did." Something flickered in Lucien's gaze. Recognition, maybe, or warning, or just the desperate acknowledgement that someone, anyone, finally understood. Elena ran. She grabbed her cart and fled the penthouse like a woman on fire, her breath coming in ragged gasps that echoed through the empty service elevator. Her mind raced faster than her heart, trying to process what she'd witnessed while every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to forget, to bury it deep, to stay invisible. But she couldn't, because she'd seen the truth written in those paralyzed eyes. Lucien Moretti wasn't dying of some mysterious illness. He was being murdered, slowly, carefully, in his own bed, and she was the only person who knew. The elevator doors opened onto the basement level where the cleaning staff kept their lockers. Elena stumbled out, her vision swimming, and barely made it to the bathroom before her stomach emptied itself into the toilet. She retched until nothing came up but bile and terror, her whole body shaking with the weight of what she'd just witnessed. When she finally emerged, pale and sweating, she found her supervisor waiting by her locker. Marcus was a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a wedding ring he never talked about. He'd hired Elena 3 years ago despite her lack of references, and in return she showed up on time and never complained about the blood. "You look like hell," he said without preamble. Elena wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Food poisoning." "Uh-huh." Marcus didn't believe her, but he also didn't push. That was the thing about working in places like this. You learned real fast not to ask too many questions. "Go home. Sleep it off. I'll cover your route tonight." Elena nodded, grabbed her coat from the locker, and left before he could see her hands still shaking. The city swallowed her whole the moment she stepped outside. Chicago at 3 in the morning was a different beast than Chicago during daylight hours. The streets belonged to addicts and working girls, and men who'd made careers out of other people's suffering. Elena kept her head down and walked fast, her fingers wrapped tight around the stolen vial in her pocket. She lived in a studio apartment in Pilsen, 40 minutes away by bus, and a lifetime away from the marble floors of the Drake Tower. The building smelled like old grease and new regrets, the hallway lights flickering in rhythm with the bass from someone's stereo 3 floors up. Elena locked herself inside, threw both deadbolts, and stood with her back against the door until her breathing slowed to something almost normal. Then she pulled out the vial. The glass felt cold against her palm, the liquid inside shifting with a viscosity that made her skin crawl. She had no idea what she was looking at. No medical training, no chemistry background, just a high school education that ended when her mother got sick and someone needed to start paying bills. But she knew someone who might understand. Julio lived 2 floors down, a former paramedic who'd lost his license after stealing painkillers from the ambulance to manage his dying father's cancer. He spent his days now doing under-the-table medical work for people who couldn't afford hospitals or couldn't risk them. Elena knocked on his door at 3:30 in the morning. He answered in boxers and a stained undershirt, his eyes bleary with interrupted sleep. "The hell, Elena? I need you to tell me what this is." She held up the vial. Julio squinted at it, then at her. "Where'd you get that?" "Does it matter?" "It does if you stole it from the wrong people." Elena's silence was answer enough. Julio sighed, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and stepped aside to let her in. His apartment was smaller than hers, cluttered with medical textbooks and empty beer bottles. He cleared space on the kitchen table and held the vial up to the light. Sodium thiopental, he read slowly. Vecuronium bromide. Christ, Elena, where did you get this? What does it do? What is it? Julio set the vial down carefully, like it might explode. This is a paralytic cocktail. Anesthesia-grade muscle relaxants. You give someone enough of this over time, it would look like progressive neuromuscular disease. Paralysis. Respiratory failure. Complete loss of motor function while leaving cognitive ability intact. Elena's stomach dropped. They'd be awake? Completely. They'd feel everything, understand everything, just couldn't move or speak or do a damn thing about it. Julio's eyes narrowed. Who the hell is using this? A doctor. What doctor? I don't know his name. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly freezing despite the apartment's stale heat. But he's killing someone with it, slowly, making it look like a disease. Julio was quiet for a long moment. Then he handed the vial back to her like it burned his fingers. Listen to me very carefully, Elena. Whatever you saw, whoever you saw, you need to forget it. Right now, tonight, forever. I can't just... Yes, you can. You absolutely can. Julio's voice hardened with the kind of fear that came from experience. People who use drugs like this, they're not playing around. This is professional-level murder, which means professional-level consequences for anyone who interferes. You tell someone, you become a problem. You become a problem, you disappear. That's how this works. Elena stared at the vial in her hand, at the amber liquid that represented weeks, maybe months of calculated torture, at the physical evidence that Lucien Moretti, a man who'd built an empire on violence, was being slowly erased by someone close enough to inject poison directly into his veins. What if I don't say anything? She whispered. Then someone dies who was going to die anyway, and you stay alive. Julio's expression softened slightly. I know that's cold, but cold is how you survive places like this. Elena left his apartment with the vial still in her pocket and Julio's warning ringing in her ears. She should have thrown it away, should have flushed the evidence and scrubbed the memory of those paralyzed eyes from her mind, should have shown up to work tomorrow night like nothing happened and let Chicago's underworld handle its own murders the way it always did. But she couldn't shake the image of Lucien lying there, completely conscious while someone slowly erased him from existence. She knew what that felt like. Not the paralysis, but the invisibility, the helplessness, the experience of being so thoroughly dismissed by the world that you could scream yourself hoarse and nobody would even turn their head. Elena had spent her entire life being that kind of invisible, fat, poor, uneducated, the kind of woman people looked through on the street, in the grocery store, at work. She'd endured a lifetime of small cruelties and large humiliations, each one teaching her that women like her didn't matter, that they were background noise in other people's stories. And now here she was, holding evidence of a murder nobody else knew was happening. The only witness to an invisible crime. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, exhausted eyes, gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, a body the world had taught her to be ashamed of since she was 12 years old. Then she looked at the vial. Julio was right. The smart move was to forget everything, to stay small and quiet and alive. But Elena had spent 37 years making the smart move, and where had it gotten her? She slept for 3 hours, dreamless and heavy, then woke with a decision already made in that quiet space between unconsciousness and thought. She was going back. Elena arrived at the Drake Tower that night at exactly midnight, just like always. Marcus gave her a concerned look when she clocked in. You sure you're good? I'm good. She wasn't good. She was terrified. But terror and determination could look a lot alike if you squinted, and Elena had gotten very good at squinting. She pushed her cart through the familiar hallways, past the armed guards who never looked at her, past the closed doors hiding whatever sins needed hiding. But instead of starting her usual route on the lower floors, she rode the elevator straight to the penthouse. The master suite door was closed this time. Elena's hand hesitated on the handle. She could still walk away, could still choose survival over stupidity. Then she remembered those eyes. She opened the door. Lucien lay exactly where she'd left him 24 hours ago, his body a motionless shell beneath silk sheets. The IV still dripped steadily into his arm. The monitors still beeped their steady rhythm. Everything looked perfectly normal if you didn't know what to look for. But Elena knew now. She crossed to the bed, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Up close, Lucian looked even worse than before. The muscle wastage was more pronounced. His skin had taken on a waxy quality. Whatever they were giving him was working. He was dying by inches. Elena pulled the IV bag from its stand and examined it in the dim light. Clear liquid, no visible contamination. But she knew better now. "I'm going to help you," she whispered, though she had no idea if he could even hear her. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help you." Those gray eyes tracked her movement again, sharp and aware despite the paralysis. And for just a second, Elena could have sworn she saw something flicker in their depths. Hope, maybe. Or a warning. She didn't know which scared her more. Elena disconnected the poisoned IV with shaking hands, her fingers clumsy with fear and adrenaline. She'd watched enough medical dramas to know the basic mechanics: twist, pull, replace. But television didn't prepare you for the reality of standing in a crime lord's bedroom, actively interfering with his murder, while armed men patrolled the hallways outside. She pulled a bottle of saline solution from her cleaning cart, stolen from Julio's apartment while he was passed out drunk, and rigged it to the IV stand with the kind of desperate improvisation that would have been comical if the stakes weren't so catastrophically high. "This is temporary," she told Lucien, still whispering like the walls might be listening. "I don't know what I'm doing. I just know what they're doing is wrong." His eyes stayed locked on her face with an intensity that made her hands shake worse. Elena disposed of the poisoned IV bag in her cart, buried beneath trash bags and dirty rags where nobody would think to look. Then she stood there for a long moment, staring at the man who'd built an empire on violence and fear, now reduced to this, a prisoner in his own body, dependent on a cleaning woman he'd probably never noticed before. "I'll come back tomorrow night," she said finally. "I'll bring more saline. I'll figure out the rest." She had no plan, no resources, no idea what she'd do if someone caught her, but she'd made a choice, and choices had momentum. Elena left the penthouse and returned to her cleaning route, her mind racing faster than her hands as she wiped down surfaces and emptied trash bins. The physical work felt distant, mechanical, like she was operating her body from somewhere else entirely. By 4 a.m., she'd convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. By 5 a.m., she was planning tomorrow night's approach. By 6 a.m., when her shift ended and the city started waking up, Elena Ward had become something she'd never been before: dangerous. She rode the bus home in the gray pre-dawn light, watching Chicago transform from nightmare to morning commute. Businessmen in suits, students with headphones, mothers with strollers, all of them living in a completely different world than the one she'd just left. None of them knew that somewhere above the city, a king was dying in silence, and a cleaning woman was the only thing standing between him and the grave. Elena spent the day researching neuromuscular paralysis and antidotes on the public library computers, reading medical journals she barely understood, while elderly men used the terminals next to her for online poker. She took notes in cramped handwriting, copying down drug names and dosage information, and half-understood explanations of how paralytic agents worked. By noon, she'd figured out the basics. By 3 p.m., she'd realized how far in over her head she actually was. Julio had been right. This was professional-level medical murder. Whoever was killing Lucian knew exactly what they were doing, which meant Elena's saline substitution would buy maybe 48 hours before they noticed the toxin levels dropping. After that, they'd adjust. Or worse, they'd realize someone was interfering. Elena stared at her notes, her chest tight with the kind of fear that made it hard to breathe. She should stop. Should walk away while she still could. Should let Lucien Moretti die the way he was always going to die. But that night, when she arrived at the Drake Tower, she brought more saline. And the night after that, and the night after that. She developed a routine. Midnight arrival. Elevator to the penthouse. 5 minutes to switch the IV bags. Back to her cleaning cart before anyone noticed the slight woman in the gray uniform doing anything more interesting than emptying trash. On the fourth night, something changed. Elena was disconnecting the poisoned IV when Lucian's right hand twitched, just barely, just the faintest curl of fingers that had been motionless for weeks. But she saw it. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at Lucien's face and found those gray eyes burning with something new. Fury. The paralysis was breaking. Whatever they'd been giving him was slowly wearing off, and Lucien Moretti was waking up inside his own body like a monster clawing its way out of a grave. "Can you feel it?" Elena whispered. "Can you feel yourself coming back?" His jaw clenched. The tendons in his neck stood out like cables, and his eyes promised violence the moment he could deliver it. Elena should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something close to vindication. "Good," she said quietly. "Get angry. Stay angry, because when you can move again, we're going to find whoever did this to you, and they're going to wish they'd finished the job." She didn't know where the words came from, didn't recognize the steel in her own voice, but something had shifted inside her over the past 4 nights, watching a powerful man reduced to nothing while she, invisible, dismissible, nobody Elena, held his life in her hands. Power changed shape when you weren't looking, and Elena was starting to understand what hers felt like. She finished replacing the IV bag and was reaching for her cleaning cart when footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Elena's blood went cold. The door opened before she could hide, and a man she'd never seen before stepped into the penthouse suite. He was tall, expensive-looking, with Lucien's same dark hair and sharp features. But where Lucien had always carried violence like a second skin, this man wore charm like armor, all perfect teeth and practiced warmth. "Well," he said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "Who the hell are you?" Elena's throat closed up. The man in the doorway studied her with the kind of casual interest you'd give a stray dog that wandered into your yard, curious whether it might bite or just needed to be kicked back outside. "I asked you a question," he said, stepping fully into the room. His shoes were Italian leather. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. "Who are you?" Elena's mind raced through a dozen lies and settled on the only truth that might save her life. "Cleaning crew," she managed, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Night shift." The man's eyes flicked to her cart, to the cleaning supplies arranged in their usual configuration, then back to her face. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Cleaning crew doesn't usually work the penthouse. Marcus reassigned me." Elena forced herself to breathe normally, to meet his gaze without flinching. "Said the regular girl quit." It wasn't entirely a lie. The woman who'd cleaned Lucien's suite before had disappeared 3 months ago. Elena had assumed she'd found better work. Now she wondered if she'd found something worse. The man walked past her toward the bed, his movements relaxed and predatory all at once. He looked down at Lucien with something Elena couldn't quite identify. Not love, not even concern. Just a kind of clinical assessment, like someone checking on an investment. "How's he looking tonight?" he asked without turning around. Elena's hand tightened on her cart handle. "I don't know. I just clean." "Right, you just clean." He reached out and adjusted the IV bag, the saline bag Elena had just connected, and her heart stopped completely. But he didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Just checked the drip rate with practiced efficiency and stepped back. "Make sure you empty the medical waste properly. We don't want any biohazard issues." "Yes, sir." The man finally turned to look at her again, really look at her, and Elena felt his attention slide across her body like oil, taking in her gray uniform, her worn shoes, the extra weight she carried around her middle and hips. She saw the exact moment he dismissed her as irrelevant. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." "Well, Elena, I'm Damien Vale, Lucien's cousin." He said it like she should be impressed, like the name meant something beyond confirming what she'd already suspected, that family was often the knife you never saw coming. "I'll be checking in regularly while my cousin recovers. Make sure you keep this suite spotless. Lucien's very particular about his surroundings." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Damien crossed back to the door, paused, and looked over his shoulder one last time. "You see anything unusual up here? Anything that seems off?" The question hung in the air like a noose. "No, sir," Elena said. "Just a sick man and a lot of floors that need mopping." Damien's smile widened slightly. "Good. Let's keep it that way." He left, and Elena stood frozen in place for a full minute after his footsteps faded down the hallway. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the floor, her back against the cleaning cart, her whole body shaking with the adrenaline crash. That was Damien Vale, the man behind the murder. She'd just met her enemy face to face, and he'd looked right through her like she was nothing. Elena wanted to laugh, or cry, or run screaming out of the building and never come back. Instead, she looked at Lucian. His eyes were open, tracking her position on the floor. And in their gray depths, she saw something that looked almost like approval. He'd watched the whole exchange, seen her lie without hesitation, recognized in that moment what she was becoming, an accomplice. Elena pushed herself to her feet, grabbed her cart, and finished her shift on autopilot. But her mind wouldn't stop replaying the encounter, dissecting every word Damien had spoken, every gesture he'd made. He'd checked the IV himself, which meant he knew exactly what was supposed to be in it, which meant he was more than just the man behind the conspiracy. He was actively participating in his cousin's murder. When Elena finally left the Drake Tower at 6 a.m., the sun was already turning the city gold. She rode the bus home in silence, staring at her reflection in the window and barely recognizing the woman looking back. 4 days ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was lying to murderers. And the worst part? She was getting good at it. Elena spent the next week maintaining her routine with mechanical precision. Midnight shifts, IV bag switches, 5 minutes in the penthouse, then back to cleaning the rest of the tower like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Lucien was getting stronger, not quickly, not obviously. But Elena noticed the small things, the way his fingers curled more deliberately now, the muscle tone starting to return to his arms, the fact that his eyes followed her movements with increasing sharpness, like a predator remembering how to hunt. On the 8th night, she walked into the penthouse and found him looking directly at her. Not tracking, not following, looking, like he'd been waiting. Elena's breath caught. She crossed to the bed slowly, searching his face for any sign of the paralysis that had trapped him for weeks. His jaw was still clenched, his body still mostly immobile, but something fundamental had shifted. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. His right hand lifted off the bed, just barely, just enough to answer. Yes. Elena's eyes burned with something that might have been tears if she'd let herself cry. Instead, she pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. Questions she'd written down during her shift, things she needed to know if they were going to survive this. "I'm going to ask you questions. Move your hand for yes, stay still for no. Understand?" His hand moved. "Is Damien the one poisoning you?" Movement. "Is the doctor working with him?" Movement. "Do you know what they're giving you?" His hand stayed still. Elena's chest tightened. "I had it tested. Sodium thiopental. Vecuronium bromide. They're making it look like neuromuscular disease." Something flickered across Lucian's face. Rage, maybe, or grudging respect that she'd figured it out. "Do you have people who are still loyal? People Damien doesn't control?" His hand moved, but slower this time, like the answer was complicated. Elena understood. In an empire built on fear and violence, loyalty was always conditional. And when the king looked weak, even the most devoted soldiers started hedging their bets. "I need names," she said. "People I can contact when you're strong enough. People who will believe you're still alive." Lucien's eyes moved to the nightstand. Elena followed his gaze and found a locked drawer. She tried the handle anyway, knowing it wouldn't open but needing to try. "Where's the key?" His eyes shifted to the bookshelf across the room, a wall of leather-bound volumes that probably existed purely for decoration since Elena doubted Lucian spent his evenings reading Hemingway. She crossed to the shelves and started searching, running her fingers along the spines until she found one that felt wrong, heavier. She pulled it out and found it wasn't a book at all, but a hollow container disguised as one. Inside was a key. Elena returned to the nightstand, unlocked the drawer, and found a satellite phone. Not a regular cell phone that could be tracked and monitored. An encrypted military-grade communication device that probably cost more than her car. She held it up so Lucian could see. "Your people?" His hand moved. Elena pocketed the phone and locked the drawer again, replacing everything exactly as she'd found it. Then she returned to Lucian's bedside and made a decision that terrified her. "I'm going to need you to trust me," she said quietly. "Really trust me. Because what comes next is going to get a lot worse before it gets better." Lucian's eyes bored into hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then, very deliberately, his hand reached out and his fingers brushed against hers. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Elena felt it down to her bones. She was in this now, completely, irrevocably, and there was no going back. The next morning, Elena did something she'd never done before. She called in sick to her day job, a part-time cashier position at a grocery store in Pilsen that paid just enough to cover the rent her cleaning work didn't. Then she took the satellite phone to Julio's apartment. He opened the door, took one look at what she was carrying, and tried to close it again. Elena jammed her foot in the gap. "I need your help." "No." "Julio, please." "I said no, Elena, Jesus Christ." He looked genuinely scared now, his eyes darting to the phone like it might explode. "Where the hell did you get that?" "It doesn't matter where." "It absolutely matters where. That's not a phone you buy at Best Buy. That's the kind of phone that comes with dead bodies attached." "I know what it is." Elena pushed harder against the door. "That's why I need you to tell me how to use it." Julio stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, high and slightly unhinged. "You're actually doing this. You're actually interfering in whatever the hell you saw. A man is being murdered. So? Men get murdered every day in this city. Most of them probably deserve it. This one didn't," Elena said, and realized as she said it that she believed it. Or at least she believed nobody deserved to die the way Lucien was dying. Slowly, consciously, trapped inside their own body, while people they trusted erased them from existence. Julio's expression shifted. "You care about him." "I care about stopping what's happening to him." "That's the same thing." Maybe it was. Elena didn't have time to examine the distinction. "Are you going to help me or not?" she asked. Julio sighed, opened the door wider, and let her inside. He took the satellite phone, turned it over in his hands, and pressed a series of buttons that made the screen light up. "It's encrypted," he said. "Military grade, probably modified for private use. You'll need a code to unlock it." "What kind of code?" "Usually 6 to 8 digits. Something the owner would remember, but others wouldn't guess." Elena thought about Lucien, about the man she'd seen only in pieces, through observation and stolen moments. What would someone like that use as a security code? "Can you crack it?" she asked. Julio gave her a look. "I was a paramedic, not a hacker." "But you know people." "Elena, you know people who know people. That's how this city works." Julio was quiet for a long moment. Then he set the phone down on his kitchen table and rubbed his face with both hands. "There's a guy in Bridgeport," he said finally. "Does electronics work? No questions asked." "Can you get me to him?" "I can get you an address. What you do with it is your problem." Julio looked at her with something approaching pity. "You know this is going to end badly, right? However you think this plays out, it's going to be worse." Elena picked up the satellite phone and slipped it back into her bag. "It's already worse," she said. The address Julio gave her led to a pawn shop sandwiched between a check-cashing place and a boarded-up restaurant. Elena arrived just after noon, when the neighborhood was at its busiest, which meant relatively empty compared to other parts of the city. The shop smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation. A bell chimed when she entered, and a man emerged from the back room like he'd been summoned. He was maybe 50, rail-thin, with the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped caring somewhere around 1997. "Help you?" he asked. Elena set the satellite phone on the counter between them. "I need this unlocked." The man looked at the phone, then at her, then back at the phone. "Where'd you get this?" "Does it matter?" "It does if whoever you took it from comes looking for it." "They won't," Elena said, hoping that was true. The man picked up the phone, examined it for maybe 10 seconds, and named a price that made Elena's stomach drop. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then I can't help you." Elena thought about walking away, about giving up before things got any more complicated. But then she thought about Lucien's eyes tracking her across the room, about Damien's dismissive smile, about 37 years of being invisible. "I can get you half now," she lied. "The rest when you're done." The man studied her face, clearly trying to figure out if she was worth the risk. Whatever he saw there must have been convincing because he nodded slowly. 2 days. Come back Thursday." Elena paid him everything she had in her wallet, $93 that was supposed to cover groceries for the next week, and walked out before he could change his mind. She'd figure out the rest later, or she'd starve. Right now, neither option felt particularly real. That night, Elena returned to the Drake Tower with a plan that was equal parts desperation and insanity. She needed to know what Damien was planning, needed to understand the timeline, the endgame, the moment when they'd stop poisoning Lucien slowly and just finish the job, which meant she needed to get into Damien's office. The problem was that Damien's office was on the 38th floor, 4 levels below the penthouse, in a section of the building Elena had never been authorized to access. Her cleaning route was specifically limited to the top floor and the basement levels. Going anywhere else would raise questions. But Elena had spent 3 years being invisible in this building, and invisible people could go anywhere if they pushed the right cart. She waited until 2 a.m., when the late-night meetings had ended and most of Damien's people had gone home. Then she took the service elevator down to 38, pushed her cart out into the hallway like she belonged there, and headed straight for the corner office. The door was locked. Of course it was locked. Elena pulled a bobby pin from her hair. She'd spent the last 2 days watching YouTube videos on basic lockpicking and jammed it into the mechanism with shaking hands. Nothing happened. She tried again, twisting the pin the way the video had demonstrated, and felt something catch. The lock clicked open. Elena couldn't believe it actually worked. The videos made it look so simple, but they never mentioned how your hands would shake so badly you could barely hold the pin, or how every sound in the hallway would feel like gunshots. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. Damien's office was smaller than she'd expected, more functional. A desk, a laptop, filing cabinets, windows overlooking the city like a constant reminder of everything he was trying to steal. Elena went straight for the desk. The drawers were locked too, but the same bobby pin trick worked on cheaper mechanisms. She rifled through files and folders, looking for anything that might give her ammunition. Financial records, contact lists, emails, anything. What she found was worse than she'd imagined. A contract. Multiple contracts, actually. Agreements with rival crime families to carve up Lucien's territory the moment he died. Sales of legitimate business fronts to shell corporations. Bank transfers routing money out of Moretti Holdings into Damien's private accounts. He wasn't just killing Lucien, he was dismantling the entire empire piece by piece. Elena photographed everything with her phone, her hands steadier now that she had a purpose. She was so focused on the documents that she didn't hear the door open behind her. Find anything interesting? Elena spun around so fast she knocked a file folder onto the floor. Damien stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, that same easy smile on his face. But his eyes were cold now, calculating. The door was open, Elena stammered. I was just cleaning. With your phone out? Taking pictures? Damien stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. That's a strange way to clean, Elena. Her name in his mouth sounded like a threat. Elena's mind raced. She could run, could scream, could try to fight her way past him and hope security didn't catch her before she made it to the elevator. But Damien was blocking the only exit, and she knew with absolute certainty that he'd never let her leave this room alive. I'm going to ask you one time, Damien said quietly. Who sent you? Nobody sent me. I was just... Don't. His voice hardened. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you're just a cleaning lady who accidentally wandered into my locked office and started photographing confidential documents. Someone sent you. Someone who knows what I'm doing. So I'll ask again. Who? Elena's back hit the desk. She had nowhere left to go. Last chance, Damien said. Who are you working for? And Elena made a choice that surprised even herself. Lucien, she said. Damien went very still. Lucien's dying. Is he? You've seen him. He can barely breathe on his own. I've seen a lot of things, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Including what your doctor's been putting in his IV. The smile disappeared from Damien's face completely. You stupid bitch, he said, almost wonderingly. You've been switching the bags. Elena didn't confirm it, didn't deny it, just stood there with her heart hammering against her ribs and waited to see if she'd live through the next 60 seconds. Damien pulled out his phone. I'm calling security, he said. They're going to take you to the basement. And then we're going to have a much longer conversation about exactly what you know and who you've told. I've told everyone, Elena lied. Sent copies of everything to 3 different people. If I don't check in by morning, it all goes to the FBI. It was a bluff so transparent a child could see through it, but Elena delivered it with enough conviction that Damien hesitated. You're lying. Maybe. But are you willing to risk it? Damien stared at her, and Elena watched him run calculations behind his eyes, weighing options, assessing threats, trying to figure out if she was really this stupid or if she actually had an insurance policy. Then the office door exploded inward. Two men in dark suits burst through, guns drawn, moving with military precision. They had Damien on the ground in under 3 seconds, his face pressed against the carpet while they zip-tied his hands behind his back. Elena stumbled backward, her brain trying to process what was happening. One of the men looked at her. You Elena Ward? She nodded, unable to form words. Boss wants to see you, now. They hauled Damien to his feet and dragged him out of the office while he screamed threats and promises of what he'd do to her. Elena followed on shaking legs, her mind still trying to catch up with reality. The men took her to the service elevator, not down to the basement like she'd expected, up to the penthouse. When the doors opened, Elena saw the suite transformed. Guards everywhere, medical equipment, and standing in the center of it all, supported by two men but standing nonetheless, Lucien Moretti. He looked like death had spit him back out, gaunt, pale, shaking with the effort of remaining upright. But his eyes were clear and furious and completely, terrifyingly alive. The guards threw Damien onto the floor at Lucien's feet. Cousin, Lucien said, his voice rough from weeks of disuse, but still carrying enough authority to make everyone in the room straighten. We need to talk. Elena watched Damien's face cycle through shock, terror, and finally desperate calculation. Lucien, thank God. This woman, Lucien interrupted, saved my life. While you were selling my empire to the Italians and the Russians and anyone else who'd pay for a piece, I was protecting your interests. You were murdering me. Lucien's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. The words landed like bullets, slowly, quietly, making it look like disease so nobody would ask questions. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? You were paralyzed. I was awake, you stupid bastard, conscious for every injection, every board meeting where you pretended to cry about my condition while negotiating my territory away. Every moment you spent measuring my coffin. Damien's face had gone white. It wasn't personal. It's always personal. Lucien looked past his cousin, his eyes finding Elena across the room. Bring her here. The guards parted, and Elena walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body. When she reached Lucien, he studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You came back, he said quietly, even after you knew what this was, what I am. You came back anyway. Elena didn't know what to say to that. Didn't have words for the complicated truth of why she'd made the choices she'd made. Lucien seemed to understand anyway. He turned back to Damien. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me every person involved in this, every contract you signed, every dollar you stole, and then you're going to spend whatever time you have left wishing you'd been brave enough to kill me quickly. Lucien, please. Lucien nodded to the guards, who hauled Damien to his feet and dragged him toward the bedroom. His screaming echoed through the penthouse until a door slammed and cut it off. Then silence. Lucien swayed slightly, and the men supporting him tightened their grip. He looked exhausted, like standing upright was taking everything he had left. But his eyes stayed on Elena. You should go home, he said. Forget this happened. Forget me. Go back to your life and pretend you never met the monster who lives on the 42nd floor. Elena should have taken the offer, should have walked out that door and never looked back. Instead, she heard herself say, what if I don't want to? Something shifted in Lucien's expression. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Elena surprised herself with how steady her voice was. You're going to need help, real help. Damien won't be your only problem. There are other people, other enemies, and you're too weak to fight them alone right now. So you need someone who can move through this building without being noticed. Someone who can listen to conversations nobody thinks matter. Someone who's already saved your life once and might be willing to do it again. Lucien stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. Not as a cleaning woman or a temporary ally or a problem to be managed, but as something more dangerous. An equal. This isn't a game, he said quietly. What comes next is going to be ugly, violent, the kind of thing that leaves permanent scars. I'm already scarred, Elena said. The world did that a long time ago. At least this way the scars mean something. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. A real smile that transformed his entire face into something almost human. What's your last name? He asked. Ward. Elena Ward. He tested it out like he was memorizing it. All right then. Let's see if you survive the week. He gestured to one of the guards who stepped forward with a phone. Make a call, Lucien said. Your cleaning supervisor, tell him you quit, effective immediately. Elena took the phone with shaking hands. And then what? Then you work for me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Elena thought about her studio apartment, her bus route, her grocery store cashier job, the small, safe life she'd built out of scraps and survival. Then she thought about the last 2 weeks, about lying to murderers and switching IV bags and breaking into offices, about feeling powerful for the first time in her entire life. She made the call. Marcus answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Elena, what the hell? It's 4 a.m. I quit, she said. You what? I'm done. Effective immediately. Don't call me again. She hung up before he could respond. Lucien's smile widened. Good. Now comes the hard part. What's the hard part? Staying alive long enough to actually matter. The guards helped Lucien back toward the bedroom, his legs shaking with exhaustion. But before he disappeared, he looked back at Elena one last time. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we start planning our war. And Elena? Yeah? Thank you for seeing me when everyone else was already measuring the casket. Then he was gone, leaving Elena standing alone in the penthouse with armed men and the slowly dawning realization that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd gone from invisible to invaluable in the space of 2 weeks, and she had absolutely no idea if she'd survive what came next. But for the first time in 37 years, Elena Ward felt like she mattered, and that feeling was worth dying for. Elena left the Drake Tower as the sun was rising, the city turning gold and pink like it always did, indifferent to the violence happening in its shadows. She rode the bus home in a daze, watching Chicago wake up around her. Coffee shops opening, joggers hitting the lakefront path, students heading to early classes. Normal people living normal lives. Elena didn't belong to that world anymore. She spent the day trying to sleep, but mostly staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying everything that had happened. Damien's face when he realized Lucien was alive. The guards moving with brutal efficiency. Lucien standing upright through sheer force of will, looking at her like she was something more than just a cleaning woman who'd stumbled into his nightmare. The satellite phone sat on her nightstand, still locked, still encrypted. But she didn't need it anymore. She had something better. Access. That night, Elena didn't go to the Drake Tower at midnight. Instead, she received a text from an unknown number with an address in River North and instructions to arrive at 8 p.m. She took 2 buses and walked 3 blocks, checking over her shoulder so many times she probably looked paranoid. But paranoia kept you breathing in this new world she'd entered, so Elena embraced it. The address led to a restaurant, the kind of place with no sign and a single bouncer at the door who looked like he ate problems for breakfast. He took one look at Elena, checked something on his phone, and stepped aside without a word. Inside was elegant in the way only truly expensive places could be. Low lighting, fresh flowers, tables spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private. Lucien sat alone at her corner booth, looking more human than he had 12 hours ago. Still thin, still pale, but dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that somehow made the damage less obvious. He stood when Elena approached, or tried to, his legs betraying him halfway up before he caught himself and sat back down with controlled grace. Don't, he said when she started to offer help. I'm fine. He wasn't fine. But Elena was learning that men like Lucien would rather bleed out than admit weakness. She slid into the booth across from him. A waiter appeared instantly, set down a glass of red wine in front of her without being asked, and vanished just as quickly. I don't drink, Elena said. Tonight you do. Lucien's eyes held hers. Trust me. You're going to need it. Elena picked up the glass and took a sip. It tasted expensive and vaguely like regret. Damien talked, Lucien said without preamble. Gave us names, dates, financial records, everything. Is he still alive? For now. Lucien's expression didn't change. He's more useful breathing, at least until I've confirmed everything he told us. Elena set down the wine glass carefully. What did he tell you? That he's been planning this for 8 months, since before I got sick, before he made me sick. He approached my doctor with an offer, double his salary, triple it, whatever it took to make me disappear slowly enough that nobody asked questions. Why slowly? Because a sudden death would have triggered an investigation, a power struggle. Damien needed time to consolidate control, to move assets, to position himself as the natural successor. Lucien's jaw tightened. He was patient, I'll give him that. What happens now? Now, we clean house. Lucien pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. These are the people Damien either bought or compromised. Board members, soldiers, business partners. They all thought I was dying, so they started making accommodations. Elena opened the folder and felt her stomach drop. There were dozens of names, maybe more, each one marked with notes about their involvement, their motivations, their level of betrayal. You're going to kill all of them? She asked quietly. No. Lucien's smile was cold. Some of them I'm going to forgive, some of them I'm going to ruin, and some of them, he paused, some of them are going to wish I'd just pulled the trigger. Elena thought she should feel horrified, should feel repulsed by the casual way he discussed destroying lives. Instead, she felt a dark satisfaction that scared her more than anything else that had happened. Where do I fit into this? She asked. Lucien studied her for a long moment. That depends. How far are you willing to go? I don't know, Elena admitted. I've never been here before. No one has. Not like this, anyway. Lucien leaned back, his eyes never leaving her face. You saved my life, Elena. That matters. It creates a debt I take very seriously, but it also creates a complication. What kind of complication? The kind where my enemies will absolutely try to kill you the moment they realize what you mean to me. Elena's breath caught. What I mean to you? You're the woman who brought me back from the dead. That makes you either the most valuable asset I have, Lucien's voice dropped lower, or the most dangerous weakness. Which one am I? I don't know yet. He said it like a confession. But I'm going to find out. A phone buzzed on the table between them. Lucien glanced at it, his expression hardening. We need to go, he said. Now. What's wrong? Damien's doctor just turned up dead. Single gunshot to the head. Professional hit. Lucien was already standing, moving with more strength than he should have had. Which means someone else knows I'm alive, and they're tying up loose ends before I can get to them. Elena followed him out of the restaurant, her heart racing. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. The door opened and Lucien practically shoved her inside before climbing in after her. The vehicle pulled into traffic immediately, moving fast but not recklessly. Who would kill the doctor? Elena asked. Someone who paid him to poison me and doesn't want him talking. Lucien pulled out his phone and started typing, which narrows it down to about 6 people, maybe 7. Your cousin gave you names. My cousin gave me what he knew, but Damien was always a middleman. Someone else was funding this. Someone with enough money and motivation to buy a slow murder. The SUV took a hard right, throwing Elena against Lucien's shoulder. She felt him tense, then deliberately relax. Sorry, she said, pulling away. Don't be. His voice had gone quiet. I'm not used to people touching me without wanting something. What would I want? Lucien looked at her with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. That's what I'm trying to figure out. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city sliding past the tinted windows. Elena watched the streets change from River North's polished elegance to the industrial wasteland near the river. Where are we going? She finally asked. Somewhere safe. Somewhere Damien doesn't know about. Lucien hesitated. Somewhere I can think without worrying about who's listening. The SUV pulled up to a warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside, but hummed with quiet activity when they entered. Guards, computers, the infrastructure of an empire that existed in the shadows. Lucien led her through the space to a back office that was surprisingly comfortable. Leather furniture, a stocked bar, windows overlooking the river. He poured himself a drink and didn't offer her one this time. Elena, he said without turning around, I need you to understand something. What? The people who did this to me? They're not going to stop just because I'm awake. They're going to escalate, get violent, start making moves that put everyone around me at risk. He finally looked at her. Including you. I already figured that out. Did you figure out that staying means you can't ever go back? That your old life, your apartment, your friends, your routine, all of it becomes a liability? Elena thought about her studio in Pilsen, about Julio and Marcus in the grocery store where she'd worked part-time for 6 years, about the small, invisible life she'd built. I don't want to go back, she said. You say that now. Yes, I say it because it's true. Elena's voice hardened. You think I don't know what I'm walking away from? I've spent 37 years being nothing to everyone, being the woman people look through on the street, the one they don't remember 5 minutes after meeting. I'm done being invisible, Lucien. I'm done pretending that's enough. Lucien set down his glass. This isn't about being seen, Elena. This is about survival. It's about both. She moved closer, surprised by her own boldness. You survived because I saw you, really saw you, when everyone else had already written you off. Don't tell me that doesn't matter. It matters. His voice had gone rough. It matters more than I want it to. They stood there in the dim office, the air between them charged with something Elena didn't have a name for. Not attraction exactly, not gratitude. Something rawer, more dangerous. Lucien broke first, turning away and running a hand through his hair. You need to rest, he said. There's a room upstairs. Clean clothes, security, use it. What are you going to do? Figure out who wants me dead badly enough to kill a doctor, then decide how many bodies that answer is worth. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could help, that she'd proven herself already. But Lucien looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical damage, like staying upright was taking everything he had. So she left him alone in his office and found the room he'd mentioned. It was small but comfortable, with a bed that was softer than anything in her apartment and windows that overlooked the river. Elena lay down without undressing, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the warehouse around her. Footsteps. Voices. The occasional slam of a door. This was her life now. No going back. She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder roughly. Elena jolted awake to find one of Lucien's guards looming over her. Boss wants you. Now. She followed him downstairs to find the office transformed into a war room. Maps spread across the desk. Photos pinned to walls. Lucien standing in the center of it all, looking like death warmed over but burning with focused intensity. We have a problem, he said when Elena entered. What kind of problem? Lucien pointed to one of the photos on the wall. A man Elena didn't recognize, expensive suit, cold eyes. Antonio Russo, runs the north side. Been trying to expand into my territory for 5 years. Lucien's voice was flat. He's the one who funded Damien's little conspiracy. Thought he could buy his way into power while I was too weak to fight back. How do you know? Because he just sent me a very polite message. Lucien's smile was razor sharp, offering his condolences on my condition and suggesting we meet to discuss a peaceful transition of assets. Elena's blood went cold. He doesn't know you're awake. No, he thinks I'm still paralyzed, still dying, which gives us exactly one advantage. Surprise. Surprise. Lucien turned to face her fully. And that's where you come in. Elena's stomach dropped. What do you need me to do? Russo's hosting a party tomorrow night. Invitation only. Very exclusive. Lots of important people making important deals. Lucien pulled out another photo. This one of an elegant ballroom. He's going to be there. Unguarded. Vulnerable. You want to kill him at his own party? I want you to get close to him at his own party. Lucien's eyes held hers. Close enough to plant a listening device. Close enough to confirm he's the one behind this. Close enough that when I do move against him, he never sees it coming. Elena's hands started shaking. I don't know how to do any of that. You learned how to switch IV bags, how to pick locks, how to lie to Damien without flinching. Lucien moved closer. You're smarter and braver than you think you are, Elena, and right now you're the only person I trust to do this without screwing it up. What if I get caught? Then you tell him the truth. that you're a nobody, a cleaning woman who stumbled into something way over her head. Play helpless, play scared. He'll dismiss you the same way Damien did. Lucian's voice dropped. And then we kill him anyway, but slower. Elena wanted to say no. Wanted to explain that there was a difference between switching IV bags in an empty room and infiltrating a crime boss's party. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "How do I get in?" Lucian smiled like she'd just passed a test she didn't know she was taking. "Leave that to me," he said. The dress arrived at noon in a box that cost more than Elena's rent. She stared at it spread across the bed in her temporary room at the warehouse. Black silk that caught the light like oil, cut low enough to make her uncomfortable, and fitted tight enough to broadcast every curve she'd spent a lifetime trying to hide. A note was pinned to the fabric in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Wear this, nothing else. Trust me." Elena wanted to laugh, or cry, or set the whole thing on fire. Instead, she put it on. The silk clung to her body like a second skin, emphasizing her wide hips and full breasts, and the soft roll of her stomach that no amount of shapewear could completely disguise. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw everything the world had taught her to hate about herself on full display. Then Lucienne knocked on the door. "Come in," she said, her voice shakier than she wanted. He entered and stopped dead, his eyes moving over her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. For a long moment he didn't say anything, just looked at her like he was memorizing every detail. "That'll work," he said finally. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "I look ridiculous." "You look dangerous." Lucian moved closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "Which is exactly what we need. Russo's going to see a beautiful woman he doesn't know at his party. He's going to assume you belong to someone, and he's going to want to figure out who." "I'm not beautiful." "Yes, you are." He said it like a fact, like something beyond argument. "You just spent so long being invisible, you forgot how to be seen." Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, wanted to see herself the way he apparently saw her. But 37 years of conditioning didn't disappear just because a crime lord said she looked good in expensive silk. Lucien pulled something from his pocket, a small device no bigger than a button. "This is the listening device. It's magnetic. You get close enough to Russo, you plant it on his jacket or his phone or anywhere metal that he carries with him regularly." He demonstrated on his own suit jacket, the device clicking into place invisibly. "Think you can do that?" "I don't know." "That's not good enough, Elena. I need to know you can do this." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion he was trying to hide. The way he braced himself against the doorframe like standing upright took effort. The tremor in his hands he couldn't quite control. He was still weak, still recovering, and he was trusting her with something that could get them both killed. "I can do it," she said. Lucien's expression softened slightly. "Good, because if this goes wrong, I know what happens if it goes wrong." "Do you?" He moved closer until they were almost touching. "Because if Russo figures out who you are, what you're doing, he won't kill you quick. He'll make it hurt. He'll make it last. And he'll make sure I know about it." Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Then I won't get caught." Something flickered across Lucien's face that might have been pride, or fear, or both. "One of my men will drive you. His name is Victor. He'll wait outside. Anything goes wrong, you run. You don't fight. You don't try to be brave. You run straight to the car and you let him get you out." "What about the device?" "Forget the device. Your life matters more." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine. A knock on the door broke the moment. Victor appeared, a massive man with scarred knuckles and eyes like concrete. He looked at Elena in her silk dress and nodded once, apparently satisfied. "Car's ready," he said in an accent Elena couldn't place. Lucienne handed her a small clutch purse. "Your invitation's inside, along with a phone. It's clean, untraceable. You need anything, you call the first number. That's me." Elena took the purse, her fingers brushing his. The contact lasted maybe a second, but she felt it down to her bones. "Don't die," Lucien said quietly. "I'm not done with you yet." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with Victor and a dress that felt like a costume for a role she'd never auditioned for. The drive to Russo's estate took 40 minutes, cutting through parts of Chicago Elena had only seen on television. Waterfront mansions, private beaches, the kind of wealth that didn't advertise because it didn't have to. Victor pulled up to a gate flanked by security guards in suits that didn't quite hide their weapons. He handed over Elena's invitation without comment. The guard studied it, then looked at Elena through the window. His eyes moved over her body with professional assessment, cataloging and dismissing her in the same glance. "She's not on the list," he said. Victor's expression didn't change. "She's +1 for Castellano." The guard checked something on his tablet, frowned, then waved them through. Elena released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Who's Castellano?" she asked. "Dead," Victor said flatly. "Died 3 hours ago. Heart attack. Russo doesn't know yet." Elena's stomach dropped. What happens when he finds out? You plant the device and leave before he figures it out. The mansion was obscene in its excess. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Fountains that probably cost more than Elena's entire neighborhood. Victor stopped the car at the circular driveway where valets waited to take keys. "You have 2 hours," he said. "After that, I'm coming in whether you're done or not." Elena nodded, grabbed the clutch, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The valet barely looked at her as he drove the car away. Elena walked up the marble steps on heels she'd practiced in for exactly 30 minutes, feeling every eye on her. Guards flanked the entrance, their gazes sliding over her the same way they'd probably looked at 100 other women tonight. Assessing threat level, finding none, moving on. She was invisible again. But this time, she'd chosen it. Inside, the party was already in full swing. Beautiful people in expensive clothes, drinking expensive alcohol, while servers in white jackets circulated with trays of food that cost more per bite than Elena used to make in a day. She accepted a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking and moved through the crowd like a ghost, listening to fragments of conversation. Heard Moretti's finally dying. About time. Man's been a plague on this city. Russo's positioning himself perfectly. Elena's jaw clenched. They were already dividing up Lucien's empire like he was dead and buried. She found Antonio Russo holding court in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by sycophants and rivals pretending to be friends. He was older than his photos suggested, maybe 60, with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Elena studied him from across the room, looking for an opening. The listening device felt heavy in her clutch, despite weighing almost nothing. "You look lost." Elena turned to find a woman watching her with amused eyes. She was maybe 40, beautiful in the way rich women could afford to be, wearing diamonds that probably had their own security detail. "First time at one of Antonio's parties?" the woman asked. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "Don't worry, everyone feels out of place at first." The woman extended a manicured hand. "Isabella Russo, Antonio's wife." Elena's blood turned to ice, but she shook the offered hand anyway. "Elena." "Just Elena?" Isabella's smile widened. "How mysterious. Are you here with someone or just crashing for the champagne?" Elena's mind raced. "I'm a friend of Marco Castellano." "Oh, Marco." Isabella's expression shifted to something approaching genuine warmth. "How is he? I haven't seen him in weeks." Elena couldn't finish the lie. Couldn't stand there and smile while talking about a dead man like he was still breathing. Isabella must have seen something in her face because her own expression changed, hardened. "You're not a friend of Marco's at all, are you?" Elena's hand tightened on her clutch. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out before this went somewhere she couldn't escape. But she'd come too far to quit now. "I need to speak with your husband," Elena said quietly. "It's important." Isabella studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she laughed. "You have guts, I'll give you that. Most people don't admit when they've been caught in a lie." She took Elena's arm in a grip that looked friendly but felt like steel. "Come on, let's see what Antonio thinks of you." Elena let herself be led across the ballroom, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The crowd parted for Isabella Russo like she was royalty, which in this world she basically was. Antonio looked up as they approached, his eyes narrowing when he saw Elena. "Darling," Isabella said sweetly, This young woman says she needs to speak with you, claims to be a friend of Marco Castellano, but I don't think that's quite true. Is it, Elena? Antonio's expression went cold. He gestured to his guards, who materialized instantly. Take her to my office. I'll be there in 5 minutes. The guards grabbed Elena's arms before she could react, hauling her through a side door while the party continued around them like nothing had happened. They dragged her down a long hallway decorated with art that was probably stolen and into an office that looked like it belonged to a different century. They shoved her into a leather chair and took positions on either side of the door. Elena's hand shook as she clutched her purse. The listening device was still inside, useless now. Her phone too. And Victor was outside waiting for a signal that wouldn't come. The door opened and Antonio Russo walked in, his earlier charm completely gone. Who sent you? He asked without preamble. Nobody. Antonio backhanded her across the face so fast Elena didn't see it coming. Pain exploded through her cheek and she tasted blood. Let's try that again, Antonio said calmly. Who sent you? Elena's ears rang. Her face throbbed. But beneath the pain, rage was building, hot and sharp and absolutely lethal. I came on my own, she said through split lips. Why? Because I know what you did to Lucien Moretti. Antonio's expression didn't change. Lucien Moretti is dying. Everyone knows that. He's not dying. He's awake, and he's coming for you. The words landed like grenades. Antonio stared at her for 3 heartbeats. Then he started laughing, a sound so genuinely amused it made Elena's skin crawl. Is that what he told you? That he's fine? That he's recovered? Antonio shook his head. Sweetheart, I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, but Lucien Moretti is paralyzed in his own bed. I've seen the medical reports, hired my own doctors to confirm. The man's a vegetable. Those reports are fake. The reports are real. What's fake is whatever fairy tale someone sold you. Antonio leaned against his desk. Let me guess. You're the cleaning woman, the one who's been helping him. Elena's blood went cold. Antonio smiled. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? We've had eyes on that penthouse for months, watching, waiting, making sure the poison was working. You knew, Elena whispered. You knew I was switching the IV bags. Of course we knew. We let you switch them. Antonio's smile widened. Do you want to know why? Elena couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. Because it kept you busy. Kept you thinking you were saving him while we moved pieces into position. Antonio straightened. Damien was always the visible threat, the obvious conspiracy, but he was just a distraction. The real operation was happening somewhere else entirely. What operation? The one that's about to finish tonight. Antonio checked his watch. Right about now, actually. My people are entering the Drake Tower. They're going to walk into Lucian's penthouse, and they're going to finish what we started 6 months ago. Elena lurched to her feet. No! The guards grabbed her, slamming her back into the chair hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. You were useful, Elena. I'll give you that. Antonio pulled out his phone, typed something, then showed her the screen. It was a live video feed of Lucien's penthouse. Empty. No guards. No security. No Lucie. He's not there, Elena said, relief flooding through her. Your people won't find him. They don't need to find him at the penthouse. Antonio's expression turned pitying. They need to find him at the warehouse in River North, the one he thinks is secure, the one he moved to after you started playing hero. Elena's world tilted sideways. How did I know about the warehouse? Antonio laughed again. Because someone told me. Someone close to Lucian. Someone he trusts completely. The office door opened, and Victor walked in. Elena stared at him, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Victor, who'd driven her here, who was supposed to be waiting outside, who'd been one of Lucien's most loyal men for years. Hello, Elena, Victor said in that same flat tone he always used. You... Elena couldn't form words around the betrayal lodging in her throat. I told Antonio about the warehouse 2 days ago. Told him when Lucien would be there. How many guards? Where the weak points were. Victor's expression didn't change. By now it's over. Lucien's dead. His people are scattered, and Antonio owns everything that's left. Why? Elena heard herself ask. Money, Victor said simply. Loyalty doesn't pay as well as you'd think. Antonio walked over and patted Victor's shoulder like rewarding a dog. I offered him triple what Lucian was paying, plus a percentage of the new territory. Smart man took the deal. Elena's hands curled into fists so tight her nails cut into her palms. Blood welled up and dripped onto the expensive carpet, and she didn't care. Didn't care about anything except the crushing weight of understanding that she'd failed. She'd believed she was saving Lucian when all she'd done was give his enemies exactly what they needed. Time, distraction, a false sense of security, and now he was dead. Because of her. What are you going to do with me? Elena asked, her voice hollow. Antonio considered her. That depends. Are you willing to be reasonable? Meaning? Meaning you have information I want. Lucien's financial accounts. His blackmail files. The locations of his safe houses. Antonio crouched down to her eye level. You give me that, I'll make your death quick. Painless. You refuse, and I let my men get creative before they put a bullet in your skull. Elena thought about Lucien, about his gray eyes watching her across the penthouse, about the way he'd said her name like it mattered, about the dress he'd sent her and the way he'd looked at her like she was something more than just a cleaning woman who'd stumbled into his nightmare. And she made a choice. Go to hell, she said. Antonio stood up, his expression bored. Your funeral. Victor, take her to the basement. Make sure she understands exactly how serious I am. Victor grabbed her arm and hauled her out of the chair. Elena didn't fight, didn't struggle, just let him drag her back through the hallway while the party continued in the ballroom. Beautiful people drinking beautiful drinks and celebrating the death of a king they'd never met. The basement was exactly what Elena expected. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, drains positioned in strategic locations, a killing floor. Victor shoved her against the wall hard enough to rattle her teeth. Then he pulled out a gun and pressed it against her temple. Any last words? He asked. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, searching for any hint of the man who'd driven her here, who'd seemed so calm and professional and trustworthy. She found nothing. Yeah, she said, you should have checked the car. Victor frowned. What? The basement door exploded inward. 6 men in tactical gear poured through, moving with military precision. They had Victor on the ground in under 3 seconds, his gun skittering across the concrete while he cursed in Russian. And behind them, leaning on a cane but very much alive, walked Lucien Moretti. He looked at Elena, took in her split lip and the blood on her dress, and his expression went absolutely murderous. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. Lucien turned his attention to Victor, who was face down on the concrete with 3 guns pointed at his skull. Victor, Lucien said, almost conversationally, how long have you worked for me? 7 years, Victor spat. 7 years. And in that time, I paid you well, gave you respect, trusted you with my life. Lucien moved closer, the cane clicking against the floor with each step. So I'm curious, when did Antonio approach you? Victor said nothing. Lucien nodded to one of his men, who stepped on Victor's hand hard enough to break fingers. Victor screamed. When? Lucien asked again. 8 months ago, Victor gasped. Right after you got sick. And you said yes immediately? I said yes because I knew you were finished, because a smart man doesn't go down with a sinking ship. Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Elena. What do you think I should do with him? Elena stared at Victor, the man who'd betrayed them both, who'd been feeding information to their enemies, who'd almost gotten her killed tonight. I think you should make him tell you everything, she said, surprised by how steady her voice was. Every person he talked to, every piece of information he sold, every plan Antonio made. Lucien smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He nodded to his men, who hauled Victor to his feet and dragged him toward a corner of the basement where chains hung from the ceiling. Elena looked away, not wanting to see what came next. Lucien touched her arm gently. Come on, let's get you out of here. Elena followed him back upstairs, her legs shaking with delayed shock. They emerged in a service hallway away from the party, where more of Lucien's men waited in strategic positions. The warehouse, Elena said. Victor said, Victor lied. Lucien's expression was grim. Or more accurately, he told the truth about a warehouse, just not the one I was actually in. You knew he was a traitor? I suspected, couldn't prove it, so I fed him false information and waited to see where it went. Lucien looked at her. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I needed someone Antonio would believe, and that meant someone who genuinely didn't know the truth. Elena's chest tightened. I could have died. I know, and I would have burned this entire city down if they'd touched you. He said it like a fact, like something beyond question. But I also knew you were smart enough to survive long enough for us to get here. How did you know where I was? Lucien pulled out his phone and showed her a tracking app. A red dot pulsed on the screen, centered on their current location. The dress, he said, had a tracker sewn into the hem. I've been watching you since you left the warehouse. Elena didn't know whether to feel relieved or furious. You used me as bait. I used you as the queen in a chess game I needed to win. Lucien's eyes held hers. And you played it perfectly. Antonio thinks I'm dead, thinks his operation succeeded, which means his guard is down. What are you going to do? What I should have done 6 months ago. Lucien straightened, and despite the cane and the exhaustion and the damage that still lingered, he looked every inch the king he'd always been. I'm going to remind Chicago exactly who I am. He moved toward the main ballroom, his men falling into formation around him. Elena followed, her heart hammering, knowing whatever came next would change everything. They reached the ballroom entrance and Lucien paused, looking back at her one last time. Stay close to me, he said, and whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, don't interfere. Understand? Elena nodded. Lucien pushed open the doors and walked into Antonio Russo's party like a ghost returning from the dead. The room didn't notice at first. The music kept playing, people kept drinking. The celebration of Lucien Moretti's demise continued without interruption. Then someone screamed. The sound cut through the ballroom like a knife. Heads turned, conversation stopped, and every person in that room found themselves staring at the man they thought was dying paralyzed in a penthouse across the city. Antonio Russo stood frozen at the center of it all, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, his face cycling through shock and terror and desperate calculation. Antonio, Lucien said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. We need to talk. You're... Antonio couldn't finish the sentence. Alive? Awake? Pissed off beyond all measure? Lucien smiled. All of the above. Antonio's guards reached for their weapons, but Lucien's men were faster. A dozen laser sights appeared on chests and foreheads around the room. I wouldn't, Lucien said mildly. This is a party. Let's not ruin the carpets. Antonio set down his glass carefully. Elena watched him pull himself together, watched the fear disappear behind a mask of composure that must have taken years to perfect. Lucien, he said smoothly, this is unexpected. I'd heard you were unwell. You heard I was paralyzed, dying, being slowly poisoned by my own cousin while you funded the operation and waited to carve up my territory. Lucien moved deeper into the room, the crowd parting before him. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I don't know what you're talking about. No? Lucien pulled out his phone and held it up. The screen showed a video. Grainy security footage of Damien meeting with Antonio in what looked like a parking garage. Money changing hands, documents being exchanged. The room was silent enough to hear breathing. That's Damien Vale, my cousin, accepting payment for a very specific service. Lucien's voice hardened. Namely, my murder. Antonio's composure cracked. Lucien, we can work this out. Whatever you think happened. I don't think, Antonio, I know. Lucien gestured to his men who dragged in two figures Elena hadn't seen before. Damien Vale and the corrupt doctor, both bloody and beaten, but very much alive. They told me everything, Lucien said. Every meeting, every payment, every lie you fed them about what would happen after I died. Antonio took a step back. This is my house, my people. You can't just... Can't I? Lucian's smile was ice. You're right that this is your house. But look around, Antonio. Really look. Elena followed his gesture and realized with dawning horror what she was seeing. Half the people in the room weren't guests at all. They were Lucian's soldiers, integrated so seamlessly into the party that nobody had noticed until now. Antonio saw it too. Saw the weapons, the cold eyes, the trap closing around him. Lucian, please. You tried to kill me in my own bed, Lucian said quietly. You bought my cousin, corrupted my doctor, spent months planning my execution while pretending to be my ally. He moved closer until they were almost touching. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Antonio opened his mouth to respond. Lucian shot him. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Antonio staggered backward, blood spreading across his expensive shirt, his expression more surprised than pained. Isabella screamed. The room exploded into chaos, people running, shouting, Lucian's men moving with practiced efficiency to herd everyone toward the exits, while keeping their weapons trained on Antonio's guards. Elena stood frozen, watching Antonio collapse to the marble floor while his wife knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound uselessly. You're dead, Antonio gasped. You're a dead man, Moretti. No, Lucian said calmly. I'm the man who came back from the dead. You're just dying. He turned away, leaving Antonio bleeding on his own ballroom floor, and found Elena standing exactly where he'd left her. We need to leave, he said. Now. Elena let him pull her toward the exit, her mind still trying to process what she'd just witnessed. The cold efficiency. The absolute certainty. The way Lucien had walked into his enemy's stronghold and destroyed him in front of everyone who mattered. This was what power looked like when it stopped pretending to be civilized. They made it to the car where Victor had dropped her off hours ago. Different driver now, someone Elena didn't recognize. Lucien helped her into the back seat and slid in beside her. The car pulled away from the mansion, leaving behind the screaming and the chaos and Antonio Russo dying on imported marble. Elena stared at her hands. They were shaking. The whole world was shaking. Are you okay? Lucien asked. I don't know. Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. I don't know what I am anymore. You're alive. That's what matters. Is it? Elena looked at him. You used me. You knew Victor was a traitor, and you sent me into that house anyway. I sent you in with a tracker and an extraction team 30 seconds away. Lucian's jaw tightened. But yes, I used you. Because I needed Antonio to believe he'd won, and the only way to sell that was to put something valuable at risk. And I'm valuable? You're invaluable. He said it without hesitation. You're also furious with me, which you have every right to be. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him for putting her in danger, for not trusting her with the truth, for treating her like a chess piece instead of a person. But she'd walked into that mansion knowing the risks, had chosen to wear the dress and plant the device and lie to Antonio Russo's face. Nobody had forced her. She'd made herself a weapon. And weapons didn't get to complain when they were used. What happens now? She asked instead. Now we clean up the mess. Antonio's organization will fracture without him. His soldiers will scatter or swear loyalty to whoever looks strongest. Lucien looked out the window at Chicago sliding past. And I remind everyone in this city why you don't come at a king unless you're absolutely certain he's dead. The car pulled up to a building Elena didn't recognize. Not the warehouse. Somewhere new. Somewhere she suspected was just one of many safe houses Lucien had scattered across the city. They went inside, and Lucien led her to a bathroom where he pulled out a first aid kit. Sit, he said. Elena sat on the edge of the bathtub while Lucien cleaned the cut on her lip with steady hands. His touch was gentle, careful, completely at odds with the man who'd shot Antonio Russo without hesitation 40 minutes ago. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For everything. For getting you involved in this. For putting you in danger. For... He paused, his fingers still pressed against her face. For caring about you enough that it compromises my judgment. Elena's breath caught. Lucien, don't. His voice was rough. Don't say anything you'll regret in the morning when you've had time to think about what you've gotten yourself into. What if I won't regret it? Lucien looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Vulnerability. "Then you're even more dangerous than I thought," he said. They stayed like that for a long moment, his hand on her face, her heart hammering against her ribs, the air between them charged with possibilities neither of them knew how to name. Then Lucien stepped back, putting distance between them like he was afraid of what might happen if he didn't. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated." He left her alone in the bathroom, and Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror. The split lip, the bruises forming on her arms, the silk dress that had cost more than she used to make in a month. She barely recognized the woman looking back. The invisible cleaning lady was gone, and in her place stood someone who'd lied to mobsters, survived interrogation, and watched a man die without flinching. Elena didn't know who that person was yet, but she was starting to understand that survival in Lucien Moretti's world required becoming someone new, someone harder, someone willing to do whatever it took. And the most terrifying part was how natural it felt. How easily she'd slipped into the role of accomplice, of weapon, of the woman standing beside the devil himself. She thought about walking away, about finding whatever remained of her old life and pretending the last 2 weeks had been a nightmare. But she'd crossed too many lines, burned too many bridges. There was no going back to invisible now. Elena Ward had been seen, and the only direction left was forward. Elena woke to the sound of gunfire. Not close, not immediate, but somewhere in the building below, automatic weapons were tearing through walls and bodies with mechanical efficiency. She rolled out of bed, her body moving on instinct before her brain caught up. The clock on the nightstand read 4:17 a.m. She'd been asleep for maybe 3 hours. The door burst open and one of Lucien's guards appeared, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "We're under attack," he said. "Boss wants you in the safe room. Now." Elena grabbed her shoes and followed him into the hallway. The gunfire was louder now, echoing up through the stairwell. She could hear men shouting in languages she didn't recognize, and the wet sound of bullets hitting flesh. The guard led her to what looked like a closet, but opened onto a reinforced door with a keypad lock. He punched in a code and shoved her inside. "Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone except Lucien or me. Understand?" Elena nodded. He slammed the door shut, and she heard the locks engage with mechanical finality. The safe room was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a single monitor showing security feeds from throughout the building. Elena watched the screens and felt her stomach drop. There were at least 20 armed men moving through the lower floors, clearing rooms with military precision. They wore black tactical gear and moved like professionals, not the usual street soldiers who made up most of Chicago's criminal muscle. This wasn't a random attack. This was an execution squad. On one of the screens, Elena saw Lucien directing his men from what looked like a command center. He was still weak, still leaning on that damn cane, but his orders were sharp, and his positioning was perfect. He'd turned the building into a kill box, funneling the attackers into choke points where his people could cut them down. But there were too many of them. For every attacker that fell, 2 more appeared to take their place. Elena watched one of the screens as the guard who'd brought her here took 3 bullets to the chest and went down hard. She pressed her hand against the monitor like she could somehow help him, but he was already gone. The battle moved up through the floors. 3rd level, 4th, 5th, getting closer. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands. A text from Lucien. "Stay quiet. Stay hidden. This is Russo's people finishing what he started." Elena typed back. "How many?" "Too many. If they breach the safe room, there's a weapon in the vent above you. Use it." Elena looked up and saw the ventilation grate. She dragged over the single chair, climbed up, and found a Glock taped to the ductwork along with 2 extra magazines. She'd never fired a gun in her life. She checked the chamber the way she'd seen in movies, made sure the safety was off, and climbed back down. Then she sat in the corner with the weapon in her lap and watched the monitors while her building was systematically torn apart. On screen 3, she watched Lucien's command center get hit by a flashbang grenade. The feed went white for 3 seconds, and when it cleared, Lucien was on the ground with 2 men standing over him. Elena's heart stopped. One of the men raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Lucien's head. Then the screen went black. Elena screamed. She didn't mean to, didn't even realize the sound was coming from her until it echoed back from the concrete walls. She stared at the dead monitor, willing it to come back on, to show her that Lucien was alive, that this wasn't happening. The other screens were still active, still showing the carnage spreading through the building. But screen 3 stayed black. Elena's hands tightened on the Glock until her knuckles went white. She could feel her pulse in her throat, could taste copper and fear, could hear nothing except the pounding of her own heart and the distant gunfire that was getting closer by the second. She should stay hidden, should follow Lucien's orders and wait for rescue or death, whichever came first. But the man who'd given those orders might be bleeding out 5 floors below. Elena made a choice. She went to the door, entered the code she'd watched the guard punch in, and stepped out into the hallway. The building had gone quiet. Not peaceful, not safe. Just the terrible silence that comes after violence has done its work and moved on to the next room. Elena moved through the corridor with the Glock raised, her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep it steady. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Every sound made her flinch. She found the stairwell and started down. 3rd floor? 4th? 5th. Bodies everywhere. Lucien's people mostly, but a few attackers too. The walls were pocked with bullet holes and streaked with blood that was still wet enough to drip. Elena stepped over a corpse and kept moving. The command center door was blown off its hinges. Elena approached slowly, the Glock raised, her finger on the trigger. Inside was carnage. 3 of Lucien's guards were dead, the monitors were shattered, and in the center of the room, surrounded by broken glass and spent shell casings, Lucien sat propped against the wall with blood soaking through his shirt. He was alive. Elena's legs nearly gave out with relief. Lucien looked up as she entered, his eyes widening. "What the hell are you doing out of the safe room?" "Saving you," Elena said, crossing to him quickly. "Where are you hit?" "Shoulder. It's not bad." It looked bad. The bullet had gone through his right shoulder, maybe clipped bone based on the angle. Blood was pumping out steadily. Elena pulled off her shirt, leaving her in just a tank top, and pressed the fabric against the wound. Lucien hissed through his teeth, but didn't pull away. "They're still in the building," he said. "At least a dozen left. They're sweeping every floor." "Then we need to move." "I can barely stand." "Then lean on me." Elena got her shoulder under his left arm and hauled him to his feet. He swayed badly, his face going gray, but he stayed upright. They made it to the stairwell and started down. Every step was agony. Lucien's breath came in ragged gasps, and Elena could feel him shaking against her side, trying to stay conscious through blood loss and pain. 2nd floor. Elena heard voices below them. Russian, she thought, though she couldn't be sure. She pulled Lucien into a hallway and pressed them both against the wall, the Glock raised toward the stairwell entrance. 3 men emerged, all armed, all wearing the same black tactical gear. Elena fired. The recoil nearly knocked the gun from her hands. The shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall 2 feet from the nearest attacker, but it got their attention. All 3 men turned toward her, weapons rising. Elena fired again, and again, and again. She had no training, no technique, just desperation and the absolute certainty that these men would kill them both if she didn't stop them first. One of her shots connected. The lead attacker went down with a scream, clutching his leg. The other 2 scattered, taking cover behind door frames. Elena grabbed Lucien and ran. They burst through a door into what looked like a storage room. Elena slammed it shut and looked for something to barricade it with. Found a metal shelving unit and shoved it against the door just as bullets started punching through from the other side. Lucien slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow. "Not bad," he managed, "for a first gunfight." "Shut up and don't die." Elena's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the Glock. "How do we get out of here?" "Window, 2 floors down. There's a fire escape." Elena looked at the window across the room. It was maybe 15 feet away, blocked by more shelving units and boxes. The door shuddered as something heavy hit it from the other side. Elena helped Lucien to his feet, and they stumbled toward the window. She shoved boxes out of the way, cleared a path, then smashed the glass with the Glock's grip. Cold air rushed in. Elena looked down and saw the fire escape 1 floor below. It was a drop, maybe 8 feet, onto metal grating. "Can you make it?" she asked. Lucien looked at the drop, then at her, and smiled. "Do I have a choice?" Elena went first, hanging from the window frame before letting go. She hit the fire escape hard, her ankle rolling, pain shooting up her leg, but she stayed on her feet. "Come on," she shouted up. Lucien appeared in the window frame, his face white as paper. He lowered himself out slowly, his wounded shoulder screaming protest, then let go. He hit badly. His legs buckled and he went down on the metal grating with a sound that made Elena's stomach twist. She grabbed him before he could roll off the edge and hauled him upright. Behind them, through the broken window, she could hear the attackers breaking through the barricaded door. They had maybe 30 seconds. Elena got Lucien's arm over her shoulder, and they started down the fire escape. Each step was torture. Lucien's weight was dragging her sideways, and her twisted ankle was threatening to give out completely. But they kept moving. Ground floor. Elena looked around frantically. They were in an alley behind the building, trash bins and broken concrete stretching toward the street. A car screeched to a stop at the alley entrance. Elena raised the Glock, ready to fire, then lowered it when she recognized the driver. It was one of Lucien's men from the warehouse, the one who'd helped drag Damien away for questioning. "Get in," he shouted. Elena didn't argue. She shoved Lucien into the back seat and climbed in after him just as gunfire erupted from the building above. Bullets sparked off the car's frame and shattered the rear window. The driver floored it. They tore through Chicago's empty pre-dawn streets, running red lights and taking corners fast enough to leave rubber on the pavement. Elena held pressure on Lucien's shoulder while he bled all over the leather seats. "Where are we going?" she asked the driver. "Safe house in Bridgeport. Got a doctor waiting." Elena nodded and focused on keeping Lucien conscious. His eyes kept sliding closed and his skin was cold and clammy. "Stay with me," she said. "Don't you dare die on me now." "Bossy," Lucien mumbled. "Yeah, well, you made me bossy. This is your fault." He managed a weak smile. "My fault you're magnificent? I'll take credit for that." Elena's throat tightened. "Save the charm for when you're not bleeding out." They pulled up to a row house that looked abandoned from the outside but had lights on in the upper windows. The driver helped Elena get Lucien inside and up the stairs to a room where a woman in surgical scrubs was already setting up equipment. "Gunshot wound," the driver said. "Through and through, right shoulder." The doctor nodded and gestured to a table. "Get him up here." They lifted Lucien onto what looked like a kitchen table covered in sterile sheets. The doctor cut away his shirt and started examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "You need to leave," she told Elena. "I need space to work." Elena didn't move. The doctor looked at her more closely, taking in the blood-soaked clothing and the wild look in Elena's eyes. "Honey, you're in shock. Let someone take care of you while I take care of him." "I'm fine." "You're really not." The doctor gestured to the driver. "Take her downstairs, get her cleaned up. I'll call you when he's stable." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to stay right where she was until she knew Lucien would survive. But the driver was already pulling her toward the door and her body was starting to shake with delayed adrenaline crash. He led her to a bathroom and handed her a towel. "There's clothes in the bedroom across the hall. Take a shower. I'll bring you something to eat." Then he left her alone. Elena stared at herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized what she saw. Her tank top was soaked with blood. Lucien's blood, the guard's blood, maybe some of her own from cuts she didn't remember getting. Her face was streaked with dirt and powder residue. Her hands were still shaking. She looked like a survivor of something terrible, which she supposed she was. Elena stripped off the ruined clothes and stepped into the shower. The water ran red at first, swirling down the drain like evidence being washed away. She scrubbed her skin until it hurt, trying to erase the last few hours from her body, if not her memory. When she finally emerged, she found clothes waiting on the bathroom counter. Jeans and a sweater that were too big, but clean. She dressed and went downstairs to find the driver sitting at a kitchen table with 2 plates of scrambled eggs. "Eat," he said. Elena sat and picked at the food mechanically. She wasn't hungry, but her body needed fuel, and she was smart enough to recognize that. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus." "Not the Marcus from the Drake Tower?" "Different Marcus." He took a bite of eggs. "I've been with Lucien for 12 years, seen a lot of shit. But tonight?" He shook his head. "That was something else." "How many did we lose?" 16 men. Could have been worse. Lucien's positioning saved a lot of lives, but Russo's people came prepared." Marcus looked at her. "Word is you're the one who pulled him out." Elena nodded. "He gave you orders to stay in the safe room." I don't take orders well. Marcus smiled slightly. Yeah, he mentioned that. He pushed his empty plate away. You know what you've gotten yourself into? Not really. This doesn't end. Not with Russo dead. Not with his organization fractured. There's always someone else wanting a piece of what Lucian's built. Always another threat. Another war. Elena thought about that. About the future stretching out ahead of her. Not the quiet, invisible life she'd lived before, but this new existence of violence and danger and constant vigilance. I know, she said. And you're staying anyway? Elena looked at her hands. They'd finally stopped shaking. Yeah, she said. I'm staying. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded like she'd passed some kind of test. Good, because he's going to need you, especially after tonight. The doctor appeared in the doorway, still wearing her bloody scrubs. He's stable, she said. Lost a lot of blood, but the bullet missed major arteries. He'll recover. Elena felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. Can I see him? He's sleeping. Probably will be for a while, but yeah, go ahead. Elena climbed the stairs on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She found Lucien in the makeshift surgical room, lying on the table with his shoulder bandaged and an IV running into his arm. His eyes were closed. His breathing was steady. Alive. Elena pulled a chair over and sat down beside him. She took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV line, and just held it. She must have fallen asleep there because the next thing she knew, fingers were squeezing hers and Lucien's voice was saying her name. Elena. She jerked awake, her neck screaming in protest from the awkward angle. Lucien was looking at her with those smoke-gray eyes, fully conscious now. You disobeyed a direct order, he said. I saved your life. That too. His grip tightened slightly. Thank you. You already thanked me, remember? In the penthouse. That was for the IV bags. This is for charging into a gunfight with zero training and somehow not getting yourself killed. Lucian's expression was impossible to read. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the stupidest. Can't I be both? He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his shoulder. Probably. Elena stood up, still holding his hand, and looked at him seriously. We need to talk, she said. About? About what happens next. About the fact that someone sent a goddamn death squad after you. About the fact that you almost died tonight and you're still too weak to fight off another attack if it comes. Lucien was quiet for a moment. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're running out of allies and accumulating enemies faster than you can kill them. What do you suggest? Elena hadn't really thought that far ahead. But standing there in the dim room with Lucien looking at her like she might actually have an answer, she realized something. She'd been in survival mode since the moment she walked into his penthouse 2 weeks ago, reacting, adapting, doing whatever it took to stay alive. But survival wasn't the same as winning. We need to change the game, she said. Stop reacting to attacks and start preventing them. Stop fighting on their terms and make them fight on yours. How? I don't know yet. But I know we can't keep doing this. You can't keep bleeding for an empire that's eating itself from the inside out. Lucien studied her face. You're suggesting I clean house. I'm suggesting you burn it down and rebuild it from scratch, with people you trust, people who haven't been bought or compromised or corrupted. Elena's voice hardened. Starting with everyone who celebrated your illness while plotting your funeral. Something dangerous flickered in Lucien's eyes. That's a lot of people. Then it's going to be a busy week. Lucien pulled her closer, ignoring the pain it must have caused. His hand moved to her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You know what you're asking me to do? He said quietly. The kind of violence that requires? I watched you shoot Antonio Russo without hesitation. I think I know exactly what you're capable of. That was one man. What you're suggesting would be a purge. Dozens of people, maybe more. The kind of bloodbath Chicago hasn't seen in decades. Elena thought about the last 2 weeks, about being invisible, about being used, about the guard who died getting her to the safe room and the 16 men who'd fallen defending Lucien tonight, about the fact that she'd killed someone herself just hours ago and the only thing she felt was relief that it hadn't been her. Then let them bleed, she said. Lucien's smile was absolutely feral. You've changed. You changed me. No. His hand tightened on her face. I just gave you permission to become what you always were. What the world tried to bury beneath shame and silence. And what's that? Dangerous. Elena didn't argue. Couldn't argue. Because he was right. Somewhere between switching IV bags and firing a Glock at armed men, Elena Ward had stopped being a victim and become something else entirely. Something the world should be afraid of. The door opened and Marcus appeared, his expression grim. Boss, we got a problem. Lucian sat up despite the doctor's earlier orders to rest. What kind of problem? Someone leaked our location. We've got about 30 minutes before Russo's remaining people show up to finish what they started. Elena felt ice flood her veins. How do you know? Because I just got a call from a source on the inside. They're mobilizing now. And this time they're bringing enough firepower to level the entire block. Lucien swung his legs off the table, his face going white with the effort. How many people can we evacuate? Not enough. Not in 30 minutes. And boss, Marcus hesitated. We're down to maybe 8 men who can still fight. Everyone else is either dead or too injured to hold a weapon. The math was simple and terrible. 8 men against however many Russo's organization could muster, in a building that couldn't be defended, with a leader who could barely stand. They were going to die here. Elena looked at Lucien and saw him running the same calculations. Saw the moment he accepted what was coming. Saw him preparing to make a last stand that would end with his body cold on the floor and his empire scattered to the winds. And she decided, no. There's another option, Elena said. Both men looked at her. We don't evacuate, she said. We bait the trap. Lucien frowned. What are you talking about? They're coming here to kill you, right? To finish what they started? They think you're weak, vulnerable, that this is their chance to end you for good. It is their chance. Only if we let them set the terms. Elena's mind was racing now, pieces clicking into place. But what if we gave them exactly what they wanted? What if we let them come in thinking they've won, and then we burn them all alive? Marcus stared at her. You want to turn this building into a kill box? I want to turn it into a funeral pyre. Elena looked at Lucien. You said you needed to remind Chicago who you are. So let's remind them. Let's make sure everyone understands that coming after you doesn't just fail. It ends in fire and screaming and bodies nobody will ever find. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled like she'd just suggested the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. Tell me your plan, he said. Elena laid it out. It was insane. Suicidal, probably. But it was also the only chance they had. They spent the next 25 minutes preparing. Marcus and his remaining men rigged the building with every explosive they could improvise. Gas lines, propane tanks, ammunition caches positioned strategically throughout the structure. The doctor fled with the wounded, leaving only the soldiers willing to die for their king. Elena helped Lucien into body armor, her hands steady despite the absolute insanity of what they were about to do. You don't have to stay, Lucien said. You could leave with the doctor. Get clear before this starts. And miss the fun? Elena checked her Glock, made sure she had spare magazines. Not a chance. Elena. I'm staying, Lucien. Don't ask me again. He looked at her like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to force her to safety, even if it meant tying her up and carrying her out himself. Instead, he kissed her. It was brief, desperate, a claiming and a goodbye all at once. When he pulled back, Elena's hands were fisted in his body armor, and her heart was hammering against her ribs. Don't die, she said. Same to you. They took their positions. Lucien in the front room with Marcus and 3 other men. Elena on the second floor with the remaining soldiers, positioned to rain fire down through the stairwell. And then they waited. The attack came exactly when Marcus's source said it would. 20 men, maybe more. They hit the building from 3 sides simultaneously, blowing the doors with shaped charges and storming through with military precision. Right into the kill box. Lucien's men opened fire from elevated positions, catching the attackers in a crossfire that turned the first floor into a slaughterhouse. Bodies dropped. Screams echoed. Blood spread across the floor in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so horrifying. But there were too many of them. They kept coming, advancing through their own dead, firing back with automatic weapons that chewed through walls and furniture. Elena fired from her position on the second floor, her shots more controlled now, more accurate. She watched one of the attackers go down clutching his throat, watched another stumble backward with holes in his chest. She felt nothing except the recoil and the desperate need to keep shooting. Beside her, one of Lucien's men took a burst of automatic fire to the face. He went down without a sound, his weapon clattering to the floor. Elena grabbed it, an AR-15 with half a magazine left, and kept firing. The attack lasted maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5. Time had stopped meaning anything except the space between heartbeats and trigger pulls. Then Lucien's voice cut through the chaos. Now! Marcus hit the detonator. The building exploded, not all at once. Not some Hollywood fireball. But systematically, room by room, the charges they'd planted ignited in sequence. Gas lines erupted. Propane tanks turned into bombs. The entire first floor became an inferno that roared up through the stairwells like a living thing. Elena felt the heat hit her face from 20 feet away, felt the concussion rattle her teeth, heard the screaming of men caught in the flames with nowhere to run. Move, Marcus was shouting. Everyone out, now! They ran for the fire escape. The same one Elena and Lucien had used hours ago, now their only exit from a building that was actively trying to kill them. Elena hit the metal grating and started down, her lungs burning from smoke inhalation. Above her, she could hear the building groaning as support beams gave way. She jumped the last 6 feet to the ground and turned to help Lucien. He wasn't there. Elena's blood went cold. She looked up and saw him still on the second-floor fire escape, trading shots with someone inside the burning building. His face was black with soot, and his wounded shoulder was bleeding through the bandage. "Lucien!" she screamed. He couldn't hear her over the roar of the flames. A section of the building's facade collapsed, missing him by inches. Burning debris rained down onto the fire escape, the metal groaning under the sudden weight. Lucien stumbled, his wounded shoulder giving out, and fell against the railing. The metal buckled. Elena watched in horror as the entire fire escape started to pull away from the building, bolts popping free one by one in a sequence that seemed to happen in slow motion. Lucien looked down at her, and for just a second their eyes met. Then the fire escape tore free completely, and he fell. Elena moved before her brain caught up with what her body already knew. She ran toward the collapsing fire escape as it tore away from the burning building, metal screeching and bolts exploding like gunshots. Lucien was falling through smoke and flame, his body twisting in midair, and Elena knew with absolute certainty that if he hit the concrete from that height with his injuries, he was dead. She threw herself forward, arms outstretched, catching him at an angle that sent them both sprawling across the alley. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent white-hot pain shooting through her ribs. Lucien's weight crushed her against the broken pavement, his wounded shoulder smashing into her chest. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Lucien rolled off her, gasping, and Elena dragged herself to her knees. Her entire left side felt like it was on fire. Every breath was agony, but Lucien was alive beside her, coughing smoke and blood but breathing. "Can you walk?" she managed. Lucien tried to stand and his legs gave out immediately. Elena caught him before he hit the ground again, getting her shoulder under his good arm. Behind them, the building groaned like a dying animal. Windows exploded outward from the heat. The entire structure was seconds from total collapse. Marcus appeared through the smoke, his face a mask of soot and blood. "We need to move, now!" Elena didn't waste breath arguing. She hauled Lucien forward, her twisted ankles screaming protest with every step. Marcus grabbed Lucien's other side, and together they ran-walked, stumbled down the alley as the building behind them finally gave up its fight with gravity. The collapse was deafening, a sound like the world ending. Brick and steel and burning wood crashed down in a cloud of debris that chased them through the alley like something alive. They made it to the street just as the dust cloud hit, coating them in gray ash that turned them into ghosts. A van screeched to a stop in front of them. The side door slid open and hands reached out to pull them inside. Elena didn't recognize any of the faces, but she was beyond caring. She collapsed onto the van floor next to Lucien while Marcus shouted directions to the driver. They drove for maybe 10 minutes, taking random turns through neighborhoods Elena didn't know. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were ragged breathing and the occasional cough as lungs tried to clear themselves of smoke. Finally, the van stopped in what looked like an industrial park. Warehouses and shipping containers, and enough cover to hide an army. Marcus helped Elena and Lucien out of the van and into a building that had clearly been set up as an emergency fallback position. Medical supplies, weapons, food, and water. Everything they'd need to survive for a few days while Chicago tore itself apart. The same doctor from before was waiting. She took one look at Lucien, and her expression went grim. Get him on the table? Again. They laid Lucien out, and the doctor started cutting away his body armor. His shoulder wound had reopened and was bleeding freely. New injuries too, eek. Burns on his arms, cuts from flying debris, bruises that were already turning purple-black. How bad? Lucien asked, his voice rough. Bad enough that you need to stop falling off buildings. The doctor looked at Elena. You too. Sit down before you collapse. Elena shook her head. I'm fine. You have at least 2 cracked ribs and probable internal bruising. Sit. Down. Marcus physically pushed Elena into a chair. She didn't have the strength to fight him. The doctor worked on Lucien in silence while Elena watched and tried to keep her breathing shallow enough that her ribs didn't scream. Around them, Marcus's remaining men were setting up defensive positions, checking weapons, preparing for whatever came next, if anything came next. Elena let her head fall back against the wall and closed her eyes. Images from the last few hours kept replaying behind her eyelids. The gunfight, the explosions, Lucien falling through smoke and flame, the bodies burning in the building they'd turned into a funeral pyre. She'd killed people tonight, multiple people, and the only thing she felt was exhausted. Elena. She opened her eyes to find Lucien looking at her from the table. The doctor had finished patching him up and was now wrapping his shoulder in fresh bandages. How many did we lose? He asked Marcus. Everyone who stayed to fight. Marcus's voice was flat. 12 good men, but we took out at least 30 of Russo's people, maybe more. The fire made it hard to get an accurate count. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Their families? Already taken care of. Anonymous payments, enough to keep them comfortable. Double it. Marcus nodded and stepped away to make calls. Lucien turned his attention back to Elena. You saved my life. Again. Stop falling off things and I won't have to keep catching you. He smiled slightly, then winced as the movement pulled at his shoulder. How are your ribs? How do you know about my ribs? Because I landed on you. I felt them crack. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, but lying to Lucien seemed pointless when they'd both nearly died together multiple times in the same night. They hurt, she admitted. The doctor should look at them. The doctor should rest. She's been patching people up for 12 hours straight. As if summoned by her name, the doctor appeared with tape and bandages. Shirt up. Let me wrap those ribs before they puncture something important. Elena lifted her shirt carefully. The doctor's hands were gentle but professional, wrapping Elena's torso tight enough to support the damaged ribs without restricting breathing too much. You're lucky, the doctor said. Could have been a lot worse. Elena thought about the building collapsing, the fire escape tearing free, the countless ways tonight could have ended with her dead on the pavement. Yeah, she said. Lucky. The doctor finished and stepped back. Both of you need to rest. Real rest. Not this macho bullshit where you pretend you're fine and then collapse 12 hours later. Lucien started to protest, but the doctor cut him off with a look that could have frozen blood. I don't care if you're the king of Chicago or the devil himself. You need sleep and antibiotics and at least 48 hours without anyone shooting at you. Think you can manage that? Probably not, Lucien said. The doctor sighed and walked away muttering about stubborn idiots with death wishes. Marcus reappeared, his phone pressed to his ear. He listened for a moment, then his expression changed. Boss, we got a situation. Lucien sat up despite the doctor's orders. What kind of situation? Russo's people are calling for a meeting. They want to negotiate a ceasefire. The room went very quiet. A ceasefire, Lucien repeated. After sending a death squad to burn us alive. They're claiming that wasn't authorized, that it was rogue elements acting without leadership approval. Marcus's tone made it clear what he thought of that explanation. They're offering to hand over the people responsible in exchange for a truce. Elena watched Lucien's face and saw him running calculations, weighing options, trying to decide if this was a genuine peace offering or another trap. Where do they want to meet? He asked finally. Neutral ground, the old stockyards, tomorrow at noon. They're giving us 12 hours to prepare. That's either genuine or they're very confident in whatever trap they're planning. Lucien looked at Elena. What do you think? The question surprised her. Not just that he was asking, but that he seemed to genuinely want her opinion. I think they're scared, Elena said. You just killed 30 of their people and burned down a building with their attack force inside it. They're probably worried you're going to come after them next. I am going to come after them next. Then maybe they're trying to buy time, regroup, figure out how to hit you when you're actually vulnerable instead of when you're ready for them. Lucien smiled. You're learning. I had a good teacher. Marcus cleared his throat. So do we take the meeting? We take the meeting, Lucien said, but not at the stockyards. Too many places for snipers. Too many ways for this to go wrong. He thought for a moment. Tell them we'll meet at the Drake Tower, penthouse level, my territory, my terms. They're not going to like that. They just tried to kill me twice in one night. I don't particularly care what they like. Lucien's voice hardened. Tell them, if they want peace, they come to me, and they come unarmed. Marcus nodded and stepped away to make the call. Elena moved closer to Lucien, lowering her voice. You're going to kill them anyway, aren't you? That depends on what they offer me. Lucien met her eyes. But probably yes. Then why bother with the meeting? Because I want to look them in the eye when they realize how badly they miscalculated. I want them to understand that you don't come after a king and expect mercy just because you failed. His expression was cold enough to burn. And I want everyone else in this city to hear what happens to people who mistake weakness for opportunity. Elena understood then. This wasn't about peace. This was about sending a message written in blood and screaming that would echo through Chicago's underworld for years. This was about making sure nobody ever tried this again. The next morning came too quickly. Elena woke in a makeshift bedroom with her ribs taped and her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Lucien was already awake, sitting in a chair by the window and staring out at the city like he was memorizing it. How long have you been up? She asked. Couple hours. He didn't look away from the window. Couldn't sleep. Elena sat up carefully, wincing at the pull on her ribs. Are you having second thoughts about the meeting? No. Lucien finally turned to look at her. I'm having second thoughts about you being there. We already had this conversation. That was before you cracked your ribs catching me mid-fall, before you killed people, before you... He stopped, his jaw tightening. You've done enough, Elena. More than enough. You don't have to be there when this ends. Elena stood and crossed to where he sat. Yes, I do. Why? Because I started this. The night I switched your IV bags. The moment I decided not to walk away. She touched his face, making him look at her. I made myself part of this. And I don't quit halfway through. Lucien caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. You could still leave. Could take money and disappear. Start over somewhere they'd never find you. I don't want to start over. I want to finish what we started. This isn't a fairy tale, Elena. It doesn't end with happily ever after. It ends with bodies and consequences and a life spent looking over your shoulder. I know. Elena's voice was steady. I know exactly what this is, and I'm staying anyway. Lucien searched her face like he was looking for cracks, for doubt, for any sign she didn't fully understand what she was choosing. He didn't find any. All right, he said finally, but you stay behind me, and if shooting starts, you run. Promise me. I promise. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but sometimes lies were kinder than truth. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Lucien's remaining men swept the Drake Tower, clearing the penthouse, and establishing security. Elena helped where she could, checking weapons and running supplies, trying to keep her mind occupied so she didn't think too hard about what was coming. At 11:30, Marcus got the confirmation call. They're coming, he said. 3 representatives. They agreed to no weapons. Do you believe them? Lucien asked. No. But I have snipers in position just in case they're stupid enough to try something. They took their positions in the penthouse. Lucien sat in a leather chair that might as well have been a throne, his wounded shoulder hidden beneath an expensive suit jacket. Elena stood behind him and to the left, her Glock concealed beneath her own jacket where she could reach it in under a second. The rest of Lucien's men were scattered throughout the suite, visible enough to be intimidating but positioned to create crossfire if necessary. At exactly noon, the elevator doors opened. 3 men stepped out. Elena recognized one of them, a heavy-set man in his 50s who ran the south side. The other 2 she'd never seen before. They walked into the penthouse with the kind of false confidence men wear when they're terrified but trying not to show it. Lucien didn't stand, didn't acknowledge them at all for a long moment, just let them wait while the silence stretched tight. Finally, he spoke. "You wanted to talk, so talk." The heavy-set man cleared his throat. "Mr. Moretti, we've come to apologize for the unfortunate incidents of last night. Elements within our organization acted without authorization. We're prepared to hand over those responsible and negotiate a lasting peace." "Unfortunate incidents," Lucien repeated. "Is that what we're calling attempted murder now?" "We understand your anger. You understand nothing." Lucien's voice was ice. "You thought I was dying, thought I was weak enough to kill without consequences. So you bought my cousin, corrupted my doctor, and tried to erase me from my own empire." The man's face went pale. "We had no involvement in Damien Vale's conspiracy. That was Antonio Russo." "Antonio Russo is dead. I put a bullet in him myself." Lucien leaned forward. "Which means someone else funded the death squad that attacked me last night. Someone in this room or someone you represent." Nobody spoke. Elena watched the 3 men and saw their calculations shifting. They'd come here expecting to negotiate, to buy their way out of consequences with apologies and sacrificial lambs. They were realizing too late that Lucien hadn't called this meeting to make peace. He'd called it to pass sentence. "Here's what's going to happen," Lucien said quietly. "You're going to go back to your organizations, and you're going to deliver a message for me. You tell them that I'm done being patient, done being reasonable, done pretending that betrayal and ambition are acceptable costs of doing business in my city." "Your city?" One of the other men spoke for the first time. "Chicago doesn't belong to you, Moretti. It belongs to all of us." Lucien smiled. "Not anymore." He gestured to Marcus, who pulled out a tablet and turned it to face the 3 visitors. On the screen were financial records, transaction histories, and incriminating communications. "That's evidence of every deal you've made in the last 6 months, every bribe, every stolen shipment, every murdered rival." Lucien's voice was conversational. "I have copies going to the FBI, the DEA, and about a dozen federal prosecutors who would love nothing more than to take down Chicago's organized crime in one coordinated sweep." The heavy-set man's face had gone from pale to gray. "You're bluffing, am I?" Lucien pulled out his phone. "One call, that's all it takes. And by this time tomorrow, every person in your organizations will be in federal custody. You'd destroy yourself in the process." "Maybe, or maybe I've already moved all my assets offshore, cleaned my books, insulated myself from the same investigations that would end you." Lucien set down his phone. "The question is whether you're willing to bet your life that I'm lying." Silence swallowed the room. Elena watched the 3 men realize they'd walked into a trap far more sophisticated than bullets and explosions. Lucien hadn't just survived their assassination attempts. He'd documented their crimes and positioned himself to destroy them with a phone call. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, they were probably still trying to process it. "What do you want?" the heavy-set man asked finally. "I want you to understand something very clearly." Lucien stood slowly, every inch a king addressing subjects. "You came after me when you thought I was weak, when you thought the paralysis and the poison had made me vulnerable. And now you're here begging for mercy because you failed." "We're not begging." "Yes, you are." Lucien's voice cut through the protest like a blade. "You're begging me not to end you, not to send your names to federal prosecutors, not to hunt down everyone you care about and make them pay for your mistakes." He moved closer to them. "And here's the truly beautiful part. I'm going to let you live." The relief on their faces was almost pathetic. "But," Lucien continued, "you're going to pay for the privilege, 20% of your operations. Everything you make, I get a piece. And before you think about refusing, remember that I have enough evidence to put you all away for life." "That's extortion," one of the other men said. "That's the cost of trying to kill me and failing." Lucien's smile was razor sharp. "Consider it a reminder, a tax on stupidity, an insurance that if you ever come after me again, you'll be destroying your own income in the process." The 3 men looked at each other. They were trapped, and they knew it. Refuse and face federal prosecution. Accept and spend the rest of their lives paying tribute to a king they'd tried to dethrone. "We need time to discuss this with our people," the heavyset man said. "You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, the deal expires and I make my phone calls." Lucian gestured toward the elevator. "Now get out of my sight." They left quickly, probably grateful to escape with their lives. When the elevator doors closed, Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding. "That was ballsy as hell, boss. But what happens when they realize you're bluffing about the federal evidence?" Lucian turned to look at him. "Who says I'm bluffing?" Marcus's eyes widened. "You actually have. I've been documenting their operations for 3 years. Every transaction, every crime, every piece of evidence a prosecutor would need to build an airtight case." Lucien moved to the window overlooking the city. "I just never planned to use it unless someone forced my hand." Elena stared at him. "You had this planned all along." "Not all of it. The poisoning was a surprise. The death squads were unexpected. But the leverage?" Lucien's reflection in the window was impossible to read. "I've been building that since the day I took control of this empire, because I learned a long time ago that fear is temporary but evidence is forever." "So what happens now?" Elena asked. "Now we wait and see if they're smart enough to take the deal. If they are, Chicago gets a lot quieter. If they're not," Lucien shrugged, "then we burn it all down and start over." The call came at 4:45 p.m. They were accepting the terms. Every organization that had tried to kill Lucien, that had celebrated his illness, that had plotted to carve up his empire, all of them were now paying him tribute for the privilege of staying out of prison. It was the most bloodless victory Elena had ever witnessed, and somehow more brutal than any of the violence that had led to it. Over the next 3 weeks, Chicago's underworld reorganized itself around the new reality. Lucien Moretti wasn't dying, wasn't weak, and he controlled enough evidence to destroy anyone who forgot it. The transition wasn't peaceful. A few organizations tried to resist. A few ambitious lieutenants thought they could challenge the new order. They learned quickly. Elena watched Lucien remake his empire from the shadows, and what emerged was different from what came before. Smarter, more insulated, built on information and leverage instead of pure violence. He still ruled through fear, but now the fear was earned through demonstrated competence rather than just brutality. Elena's role evolved too. She wasn't just the woman who'd saved Lucien's life. She became his strategist, his sounding board. The person who understood people in ways Lucien never could because he'd spent his whole life being feared rather than invisible. She sat in on meetings, offered insights, made suggestions that Lucien implemented without question. And slowly, carefully, Chicago's criminal underworld learned that Elena Ward wasn't just Lucien Moretti's lover. She was his partner. 6 months after the night Antonio Russo died, Elena stood in front of the mirror in Lucien's penthouse and barely recognized herself. The gray cleaning uniform was gone, replaced by designer clothes that fit her curves instead of hiding them. Her hair was styled. Her makeup was professional. She looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms and elite restaurants. She looked like someone who mattered. Lucien appeared in the doorway behind her, watching her reflection. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "About which part?" "Any of it. All of it. The life we've built." Elena thought about her old studio apartment in Pilsen, about riding buses and cleaning blood off marble floors, about being so thoroughly invisible that people looked right through her without seeing. "No second thoughts," she said. Lucien moved closer until he was standing behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "You know there's still time to walk away. I could set you up. New identity, money, a life somewhere far from Chicago. We've had this conversation." "I know. But I keep thinking about the woman who walked into my penthouse 6 months ago. The one who'd never fired a gun, never lied to criminals, never watched people die." His eyes met hers in the mirror. "I don't want you to wake up one day and realize I turned you into something you never wanted to be." Elena turned to face him directly. "You didn't turn me into anything. You just gave me permission to stop being small. That's not the same as being happy." "No," Elena agreed. "But it's close enough." Lucien studied her face for a long moment. Then he pulled a small box from his pocket. Elena's breath caught. "This isn't what you think," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to marry me. We both know how that would end. with federal investigations and asset seizures and a target on your back the size of Illinois. Then what is it? Lucian opened the box. Inside was a ring, platinum with a single black diamond that caught the light like smoke. It's a promise, he said, that you matter, that this, he gestured between them, isn't just convenient, isn't just strategic, that somewhere along the way between the poison and the gunfights and watching you become the most dangerous person in Chicago, I fell in love with you. Elena's hand shook as she took the ring. She'd been expecting a lot of things from Lucian Moretti: loyalty, protection, partnership in building an empire. She hadn't expected love. You don't have to say anything, Lucian continued. I know this life doesn't leave room for normal things like relationships and feelings. And Elena kissed him. It was different from the desperate kiss before the final battle. This was slower, deeper, a claiming that went both ways. When she pulled back, Lucian looked slightly dazed. I love you too, Elena said. Even though you're a criminal, even though loving you means living with violence and danger for the rest of my life, even though any sane person would run screaming in the opposite direction. You're not sane. No, Elena agreed, but I'm dangerous, and apparently that's your type. Lucian laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face into something almost young. Then he took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. That night they hosted a dinner at the Drake Tower, not for criminals or corrupt politicians or the usual cast of characters that populated Lucien's world, for the families of the men who'd died defending him. 12 families, widows and children and parents who'd lost sons, people who'd paid the price for Lucien's war, whether they chose to or not. Elena had insisted on it, had told Lucien that power meant responsibility, and responsibility meant looking these people in the eye and acknowledging their sacrifice. Lucien had agreed without argument. Now Elena moved through the penthouse, making sure everyone had what they needed, listening to their stories, learning their names. One widow was raising 3 kids alone. Another man's mother couldn't afford medical bills. A child who'd lost his father kept asking when Daddy was coming home. Elena made notes, mental calculations, figured out what each family needed and how to provide it without making them feel like charity cases. By the time the dinner ended, she'd committed to covering education costs for all the children, medical expenses for anyone who needed it, and enough financial support to make sure none of these families had to worry about making rent. Lucian found her afterward, standing at the window overlooking Chicago. That was expensive, he said. We can afford it. We can, but most people in my position wouldn't bother. Elena turned to look at him. Then most people in your position don't deserve the loyalty they demand. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. You're changing the rules. Someone has to. This city's been run on fear and violence for so long, everyone forgot there might be another way. And what way is that? One where power means protection, where loyalty is earned through demonstrated care instead of just demonstrated violence. Elena moved closer to him. You can rule through fear, Lucian. You've proven that, but fear only lasts until someone scarier comes along. Loyalty? Actual loyalty? That lasts forever. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. You really believe that? I believe people are tired of being ground down by men who see them as expendable. I believe if you give them something better, they'll fight for you because they want to, not because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. That's idealistic. Maybe. But it's also smart strategy. Because the next person who comes after you, they're going to have to fight an empire that actually wants you to survive. And that's a lot harder to defeat than one held together purely by fear. Lucien pulled her close, mindful of her still healing ribs. How did I survive 30 years in this business without you? Barely, Elena said. You barely survived. Over the next year, Elena's vision for Chicago's underworld began taking shape. Lucien still controlled the criminal infrastructure, still made money from illegal operations, still ruled through demonstrated competence and carefully applied violence. But alongside that empire, Elena built something else. She established legitimate businesses that hired people from neighborhoods where unemployment was a death sentence, created scholarship funds for kids who'd never have access to education otherwise, opened community centers in areas where hope had died decades ago. She did it all under shell corporations and anonymous donations, making sure it couldn't be traced back to Lucien or used against him by federal investigators. But the people in those neighborhoods knew. They knew who was funding their children's futures, who was providing jobs when nobody else would, who was making their city livable instead of just profitable. And slowly, carefully, loyalty shifted. Not complete loyalty. Not everyone. But enough people in enough places that Lucien's empire became something more than just a criminal organization. It became an institution that people depended on. Elena sat in Lucien's penthouse office one afternoon, going over financial reports, when he asked the question she'd been expecting for months. Do you ever miss it? Miss what? Being invisible, being safe, having a life that didn't include body counts and federal investigations. Elena thought about it, really thought about it. Sometimes, she admitted, usually around 3 a.m. when I can't sleep because I'm calculating how many ways someone might try to kill you, or when I see my reflection and barely recognize the woman looking back. But mostly I don't miss it, because that woman was small and scared and spent her entire life apologizing for taking up space. Elena met his eyes. This woman? She doesn't apologize for anything. Even when this woman has blood on her hands? Especially then. Elena's voice was steady. Because the blood on my hands belongs to people who are actively trying to kill someone I love, and I do it again without hesitation. Lucien crossed to where she sat and pulled her to her feet. You scare me sometimes. Good. You should be scared of me. Elena smiled. I'm the only person in Chicago who knows exactly how to destroy you. And yet you stay. And yet I stay. They stood there in the penthouse high above the city, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something that resembled light if you squinted hard enough. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, and it definitely wasn't the fairy tale ending that romance novels promised, but it was theirs. And for Elena Ward, the woman who'd spent 37 years being invisible, that was more than enough. 5 years after the night she first walked into Lucien Moretti's penthouse, Elena stood in front of the Chicago Tribune building and watched them unveil a new community center in Pilsen. The plaque read, the Moretti Foundation Community Center, Building Futures, Changing Lives. It was one of 17 such centers across Chicago, all funded by anonymous donors, all providing services to neighborhoods that had been forgotten by everyone except the criminals who preyed on them. Elena had built them all. She stood in the crowd of ordinary people, mothers and kids and elderly folks who'd lived through decades of violence, and listened to them talk about hope, about opportunities for their children, about the possibility of something better. Nobody recognized her. She'd made sure of that. Dressed down, no makeup, just another face in the crowd. Invisible again, but this time by choice. A hand touched her shoulder and Elena turned to find Lucien beside her, wearing jeans and a baseball cap that made him look almost normal. Proud of yourself? He asked quietly. A little. Elena watched a group of kids run into the center, laughing. Think it'll make a difference? It already has. Crime's down 30% in this neighborhood. High school graduation rates are up. People are starting to believe things can get better. Lucien's voice was thoughtful. You did that. We did that. No, you did that. I just paid for it. He took her hand, his thumb brushing across the black diamond ring she still wore. I built an empire on fear and violence. You're building one on hope. I'm not sure which one will last longer, but I know which one matters more. Elena leaned against him, watching the community center fill with people who had no idea they were standing a few feet away from Chicago's most powerful crime lord, and the woman who'd helped him survive when everyone else wanted him dead. Do you think we're good people? She asked. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. No. Good people don't do the things we've done, don't make the choices we've made. Then what are we? Necessary people. Complicated people. People who figured out that the world isn't divided neatly into good and evil, and that sometimes the best you can do is survive with enough of yourself intact to do something useful with the wreckage. Elena thought about that, about the bodies she'd helped bury and the lives she'd helped save, about the empire built on blood money that was now funding futures for kids who'd never have a chance otherwise. I can live with that, she said. They stayed until the ceremony ended, until the crowd dispersed and the community center settled into its purpose. Then they walked back to their car, not the armored SUV Lucian usually traveled in, but a normal sedan that didn't draw attention. "Where to?" Elena asked. "Home," Lucian said, "unless you have somewhere else to be." Elena thought about the penthouse high above Chicago, about the life they'd built in the shadows, about the empire that ran on her strategies and Lucian's ruthlessness and their shared understanding that power without purpose was just violence. "No," she said. "Home sounds perfect." They drove through Chicago as the sun set, turning the city gold and red and beautiful in the way cities only are when you're not looking too closely at their wounds. Elena watched the street slide past and thought about the woman she used to be. The invisible cleaning lady who'd stumbled into a nightmare and somehow emerged as the most dangerous person in the room. She didn't regret it. Not the violence, not the choices, not the blood on her hands or the empire she'd helped build from ashes. Because for 37 years, Elena Ward had been nothing, and now she was everything. The cleaning woman had saved the king, and in doing so, she had crowned herself queen of an empire that most people couldn't see but everyone felt. That was power. Real power. The kind that didn't need to announce itself or prove anything to anyone. The kind that just existed, quiet and absolute, changing the world one community center at a time while nobody was paying attention. And as Chicago's lights flickered to life around them, Elena Ward smiled, because she'd finally figured out the secret that had eluded her for 37 years. Being invisible wasn't weakness, it was the ultimate power. You just had to know how to use it.